Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you are watching second and final part of What If Kid Naruto was saved by Farron. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Naruto yelled, and he did it again, as the three of them strolled down a thankfully deserted street. Always the same fucking idiot. You know, Naruto, Sakura replied, you should lighten up a little. Disrespecting Kakashi and swearing constantly isn't going to help. Naruto continued his tirade without even acknowledging her. Why can't he send a fucking letter? Oh, wait, I can't read. Well, I could get someone else to read it for me. Or why couldn't use a phone? Right, none of those here. Anything that would stop Naruto from babbling was what Sasuke tried to say. Naruto had not acted like this before today, so it was unusual for him to talk so much or complain in this way all the time. Where had he gone? Why are you two even following me? We're not, was Sakura's hasty and unpersuasive response. Sakura, I know for a fact you live on the other side of the village. Why are you following me? No reason really, shrugged Sasuke's response. Right. Sasuke hadn't anticipated Naruto to say that, and it was evident from his tone that he wasn't buying it. And you are most certainly not just following me around to see where I live. Most certainly not. Sakura said, Naruto, please, in an attempt to calm him down. We just want to get to know you, that's all. We hardly know anything about you, like what's your favorite color? Orange. Sasuke and Sakura weren't expecting him to respond in any way. Oh, you don't wear much orange, though. Yeah, well, unlike maybe you two, I don't like prancing around in my underwear. Sasuke pondered once more what had led to such a significant personality shift. Naruto paused to look at a small sign affixed to a tall, wooden fence before asking abruptly, so, what does that say anyway? To get a better view of the sign, Sakura and Sasuke moved closer to the fence. The text painted on it had faded badly, and it was quite old. Sasuke read it, squinting in the process. It says, beware, beware what? He asked, looking up at the sky, hoping to catch a glimpse of something beyond the fence. All he could make out was the edge of a roof. Sakura wiped some dirt off the sign and remarked, I guess someone misplaced it. When she turned around, she saw something that shouldn't have surprised either of them, and her eyes widened. He's gone. Sasuke immediately turned around and couldn't find Naruto anywhere. It was clear that he had taken advantage of their curiosity in the sign. In any case, he had long since vanished, either climbing to the roof or entering one of the buildings across the street. Damn it. I can't believe we got tricked. Sakura let out a soft sigh. She said, I think we should go home ourselves, as she took one final glance around. I think you're right, Sasuke nodded. Well, see you later then. Yeah, later. After that, they parted ways and went directly home. With a little diversion, he was able to depart without anyone noticing. Sheesh, never thought it would be that easy to get rid of them. He was shocked that they were genuinely swayed by his extravagant performance. All three of them are idiots. Naruto used the pocket watch that old man had given him to check the time. There was still plenty of time for today. The afternoon was just getting started. What could he do, though? Spend time with his pals. Here, he had no friends. Go see old man? He would only be in the way as usual in the afternoons, which were always the busiest times of the day. Research. There was nothing to learn. Take a stroll. Never in 1,000 years. With his hands behind his head, Naruto reclined on the mattress and gazed at the ceiling. He pondered how life was in that far-off but charming town as he considered Lightning and New Bottom. He knew he couldn't go back there, but it had felt wrong to say goodbye to everyone. He looked at the spotless overcoat hanging on the coat rack and said, He had been able to remove the bloodstains, but it had taken some work. It appeared nearly brand new now. If he neglected to look after her gift, what would Lightning say? After a while, Naruto sat up and rubbed his forehead. Until the exams started, he tried to come up with something else to do besides lying here. He scanned his surroundings before focusing on the gunblade in its holster. He became aware that he had never been trained to wield a sword, much less one that doubled as a gun. He said, might as well practice, getting up and crossing the room. He slowly reached for the gunblade's grip and withdrew it, seemingly terrified of being shocked. Before switching the weapon to sword mode, he gave it a few swings. To get a better look, Naruto lifted the blade closer and higher. He moved one finger along the blade's reddish inner portion and another along its yellow cutting edge. He made an effort not to push too hard so he wouldn't cut himself. He sighed and swung the weapon around him in broad arcs. Then he did it several times, each time switching the hand he used and the way he swung. Holding the blade sideways with both hands, with its tip pointing toward the ceiling, he turned around in the middle of his swing and stopped it in front of him. Dissatisfied with his handling of the valuable weapon, He eyed it with a large frown on his face. Such a weapon deserved to be handled with deference and expertise. Yes, Naruto muttered following a protracted pause. Practice is what I need. The big day had arrived. Everyone was nervous as the Chunin exams were about to begin. I wish you all luck, Kakashi said as he escorted his group to the third floor via the stairs. Right behind him, dressed as usual, were his students. Since he had first met them in the lobby, they had not exchanged many words. You're going to need it if you want to succeed. Sakura questioned, are these exams really that hard? Oh, trust me. This is the easy part compared to what's to come. You need to trust each other and work as a team to have a chance of success. Don't let your guard down, always be vigilant. And remember, always expect the unexpected. When they reached the third floor, they made a left turn. The door at the end of the hallway was indicated by Kakashi, who instructed them to proceed there. He wished them luck one last time before heading out. Team 7 moved to the door and went in without saying anything. There were a variety of people from Konoha and other villages in the classroom. Some were talking among themselves, while others were sitting quietly. When they walked into the room, some gave them curious looks, but otherwise ignored them. Among the crowd, Naruto recognized a few faces. Former classmates who had graduated at the same time. Even when Sakura and Sasuke paused for a brief conversation, he chose to ignore them. He walked to the very back of the room and took a seat at a desk by the window. He sat on the left side of the seat so he could see out of the window to pass his time. He realized abruptly that the locked door was the same classroom he had visited on the day of his graduation. It's funny how something as insignificant as adding another classroom could end up being so significant. But then, the room hadn't seemed this large. Naruto checked the time on a wall clock and scowled. The exams were about to begin. It was nearly noon. However, shouldn't the proctors, judges, and other officials arrive prior to the start? Was everyone a disguised Kakashi? To him it seemed like every ninja in this village was an unreliable buffoon. Naruto observed that people were beginning to settle into their seats throughout the room as time passed. Another strange trio, this time from Konoha, sat down at the desk to his right, while a group of oddballs with musical notes on their headbands sat down in front of him. As he examined them, he realized that the reason he had labeled them as strange was because the Konoha ninjas all wore similar outfits, and two of them had nearly the same appearance. In contrast, the foreigners were strange because the only girl on the team had uncomfortably long black hair, and one of them had extremely long sleeves and bandages covering most of his face. What was wrong with this world's inhabitants? They were unlike anyone he had ever seen. I'm not surprised you didn't bother to say, hi, to old classmates, Mr. Anti-Social, Sasuke remarked as he and Sakura took a seat beside him. But you could have at least waved. Oh, shut up, was Naruto's sternest retort, raising his voice just enough to draw attention. At least no one had time to notice him, even though the cape dangling from his coat was obviously noticeable enough. You don't have to explain why, do you? A group of Chunins entered the room and paused at the front of the class, and Sakura whispered, shush, both of you. They all had a headband on their foreheads and wore uniforms of the same type. Some appeared to be holding stacks of paper at the tests. But one in particular stood out. A tall, scarred man wearing a black trench coat over his usual drab gray uniform and a black hat. As the group's leader, he was positioned in the center of the gathered Chunins. The man said, welcome to the Chunin exams, everybody. Once everyone had taken their seats. My name is Ibiki Morino, and I will be your proctor for this part of the exams. Behind Ibiki, the Chunins started to disperse and take seats on the chairs arranged around the room's edges. As they moved from desk to desk, the Chunins with the papers started to distribute them. When he received the paper, Naruto glanced at it, wondering how he was to respond without knowing what it said. In all, he counted 9 questions, all of which he found equally unreadable. Ibiki shouted, listen to the rules before you grab your pencils. After everyone had received their papers, there are 10 questions in this part of the exams. 9 are on the paper while the last one will be given at the end. Furthermore, we do not endorse cheating, so anyone caught cheating 5 times total will be disqualified along with their team. At that, Naruto arched an eyebrow. He had never anticipated having to take such a strange exam. Relieved that he wasn't the only one who was taken aback, he surreptitiously glanced around to see how others had responded to these regulations. After a moment, Ibiki asked, did everyone understand? He nodded to the final Chunin standing beside him after getting no unfavorable responses. With a nod in return, the Chunin began giving out pencils to each person. He glanced sharply at the other side of the room, where 5 people were huddled at one desk, and said, one last thing. Spread around the room, all of you. Do not sit next to your teammates, and no more than 3 people at the same desk. People moved away from their teammates and shuffled around. Sasuke shifted to the right side of the room, Sakura to the very center of the class, and Naruto himself only leaned slightly to the left. The teams he had previously eyed also scattered, and the leavers were replaced by new strangers. Fortunately, only one person took the place of his team, and the newcomer merely exchanged a questioning look with him. If there were so many safeguards against cheating, Naruto had to seriously question what had transpired. Was someone's kitten killed by a cheater? Since Miss Farron was their teacher, no one dared to consider cheating, even though Sarah had never been this strict in her classes. However, Naruto was homeschooled. Everybody ready? You have an hour to answer all the questions. Time starts now. Ibiki observed another group of Chunin aspirants being ejected and led from the room. With just 5 minutes remaining, this was the 5th attempt to fail. There would be far too many teams remaining for the next round at this rate. He was proud of the few teams that had not been caught, as the majority had been caught at least once. Finally, there was good Chunin potential. A suspicious looking boy in the back caught Ibiki's attention. In order to avoid being accused of cheating, he continued to look around and play with his pencil without writing anything. Since he was on one of the teams that had not been caught cheating at all, it's possible that he was using his pencil to send signals or that he had already cheated and was just waiting for the allotted time to pass. It would have been interesting to see his response. It was intriguing to observe how many people had chosen to sit as far back in the class as they could. But this time, it wasn't his fault. They had already been there before he did. Ibiki then focused on a pupil in the vicinity of the center of the class. A 15-year-old boy in dark green clothing was looking at the ceiling and scratching his chin as though thinking about something. Although he had written quickly in the past, which suggests that he had somehow gotten his answers, his team had also not been caught cheating. One of the few who sat in the front rows was a boy as well. He wore a jumpsuit that was stitched up the middle, and his hair was black and spiky. He also wore a rebreather, a sash around his face with eyeholes cut out, and a forehead protector that covered his entire head. He appeared to have completed his responses. Except for the 3 exceptions, everyone else was either having trouble answering or was cheating in some subtle way. Ibiki made a note that it was time to complete this after checking the time on the wall clock. Time's up. It never occurred to Naruto that hearing those words would make him feel so relieved. He detested this from the bottom of his heart, and it must have been one of the longest hours of his life. It is time for the 10th question, but first hear out the additional rules. That nearly made Naruto sigh aloud. More pointless regulations for a pointless test. Didn't it need to be made abundantly evident that cheating was unacceptable? In the Ninja Academy, did they not teach anything? Ibiki raised his hand to silence any indignant questions from the participants. If you answer correctly to this question, you are free to advance no matter how well or badly you answered to the previous questions. He looked at the class for a moment before saying, however, if you answer wrong the whole team will be disqualified and forbidden to participate ever again. You can quit now and try again next year, though. Raise your hand if you are ready to quit. Almost immediately, dozens of hands lifted into the air, and their owners and their teammates were led out. Naruto questioned whether this was a test in and of itself because the number of participants had drastically decreased. Those who give up would have to deal with the same problem if they attempted to become Chunins again. Anyone else ready to leave? Nobody put up a hand. Even though they were far away, Naruto could see the broad smile that lit up Ibiki's face. He had the feeling that something unexpected was going to happen, but he wasn't sure if it was a happy or cunning one. Congratulations, you all pass. Naruto stared in shock. Was that it? Not even a question? Although he certainly hadn't anticipated it, he could live with that. Someone shouted from across the room, wait, what the crap? What just happened? Many of the same questions were being asked, pertaining to the intended question or the purpose of the inquiry altogether. Calmly, Ibiki said, settle down, people, and I'll explain. Before continuing, he paused to ensure that everyone had taken their seats again. The meaning of the first 9 questions was to test your information gathering skills since, as many of you have already realized, the questions were designed to be too difficult to be answered by a normal genin. You were supposed to find a reliable source of information, then discreetly cheat off them without getting caught to answer the questions. This is why we placed Chunins among you as reliable sources to cheat off of. A few of them got up and approached Ibiki, identifying themselves as the Chunins he had mentioned. Shortly after, they said something about getting ready for the later portions of the tests and bowed slightly to him before leaving the room. Ibiki didn't continue his explanation until the door had been shut behind them. The point of the final question was to test your resolve and willingness to take risks, which is why all of you passed. If you had decided to quit, you would have faced a similar dilemma the next time you participated, and would always have to do so until you finally chose to take the risk. Imagine a hypothetical ninja mission in which a group of ninjas has to break into an enemy fortress without any information on the enemy who might be expecting them. A chunin must be willing to make difficult decisions based on an uncertain situation or incomplete information. Taking risks, no matter how big or small, is unavoidable. He smiled broadly as if he were about to say something else when a window suddenly smashed open. After a few seconds, a large black banner with unintelligible text was suspended from the ceiling, before Naruto had a chance to comprehend what was happening. In front of it stood a strange woman dressed in a dark orange miniskirt, a mesh bodysuit that ran from her neck to her thighs, and a tan overcoat. She was beaming broadly at them, excited and joyful. Ibiki gave the newcomer a slightly annoyed look. "Anko," he nodded in greeting. "You are early." "No problem, Ibiki," the woman, who was later identified as Anko, exclaimed. After giving the class a quick glance, she shook her head. "Oh, wow, you must be losing your touch, Ibiki." Ibiki responded, "Or this year's hopefuls are just that good," with a hint of seriousness. Their numbers barely dropped in an hour. When he was done, Anko nodded her head, seemingly unimpressed. "Then I'll cut the numbers down for you. Everybody, follow me," she said with a confident smile. The crowd stopped close to the edge of the Forest of Death, where the second part was to take place, after a lengthy walk. Before being permitted entry, Anko and a few chunins who had been waiting there instructed everyone to sign a release form. He simply signed it to be done with it. He didn't really read or listen to it. As was the case in every village these days, it was most likely about absolving the village of all responsibility in the event of an emergency. He walked back to his team after leaving the signed form at a desk for the chunins to review. Their hoods concealed their faces, and they wore dark green clothing similar to his. Despite his lack of understanding, he permitted them to do so. Wearing a hood always made him uncomfortable and tended to divert his focus at a critical point. "We will move in fifth," he informed his group. "Make sure everything is ready and you have your targets. We have 5 days to get to the tower in the center of the forest, and I want to hear about your success. Both of you understand?" With a nod, his teammates gathered the small bags containing the equipment and parts they needed. Telling him not to worry, they started to walk to a gate not far from where they were now, which was the team's designated entry point. Not everyone was as astute as he was, but he didn't see the use of bags when you could strap the components to your body. He left his group and started looking for the ideal victim, someone he would be proud to murder. His gaze soon settled on a boy with black hair wearing dark blue pants and a white shirt. The boy was conversing with his teammates, a blonde boy and a girl with pink hair, but they were quickly disregarded. He knew right away that boy was Sasuke Uchiha, Konoha's last Uchiha. If he ever saw a worthy target, it was this one. After all, his favorite targets were prodigies. Trying to keep his eyes on the Uchiha child, he turned around and followed his team. He fought the urge to laugh fiendishly as he maneuvered around 3 aim ninjas, mentally preparing the death of his target. No matter the target, he had never missed until now, and this one would not be an exception. There was nothing that would stop him. Saul would see to it that Sasuke Uchiha died on this day. The last thing he expected to enjoy was the forest. Up until now, everything in this world had been as dull as watching paint dry, but he was genuinely interested in this place. Most of the trees were taller than any Orotwas and thicker than an Ocha, the largest he had ever seen. It brought to mind the Sunlit Waterscape, a nature preserve inside Cocoon, about which he had heard good things. Even though it had been described as dangerous, he had a feeling it wouldn't be nearly as impressive as the wildlife that had crawled out of the woodwork on Grand Pulse. With a hand on his gunblade, Naruto looked to his right. He did not like the idea of a whole team of hostiles being concealed by these trees and bushes. As they ducked under a low branch, Sasuke asked abruptly, "Where do you think we should start looking? We need the other scroll and I sure as hell am not going to spend 5 days wandering aimlessly in this forest." Naruto shrugged and said, "Go for the tower and ambush anyone who gets there. It's what I would do." Sasuke let out a deep sigh. "You know, Naruto, any other time I'd appreciate your tactical input about the situation, but not today. We have no idea how long it will take for another team to get there, and I'm not risking it. PFF'd. Whatever. Just don't blame me when you get your ass handed to you." Naruto had already had enough of his teammates and chose to deal with them in his typical manner, which is by slinking away alone. But first he needed a diversion, something that would make him invisible. He quickly noticed a tiny stone conveniently resting on the ground close to his foot. Sakura startled Sasuke by asking abruptly, "What was that?" As they walked through the forest, constantly on the lookout for other teams, he had nearly grown accustomed to the silence. "What is it, Sakura?" Sasuke replied, choosing to look straight ahead rather than back. "Didn't you hear that? Like something hitting a tree nearby?" Sasuke let out another sigh. saying, "Just your imagination." He turned to her. When he noticed that something significant was gone once more, his eyes widened in shock. "He's gone." Sakura quickly spun around and let out a quiet gasp. She frantically searched the area, looking in every tree and bush for any indication of their missing teammate. Unbelievable. How does he do that? Disappear, I mean. Naruto always did this, so Sasuke knew he should have expected it. Even after 3 months of getting to know one another, Naruto still managed to catch him off guard. The second time he vanished without warning, this should have ceased to be shocking. Damn it. Well, we can't waste time worrying about him. He'll meet up with us in time, he always does. With some concern, Sakura nodded and glanced at a nearby tree in the hopes of catching a glimpse of Naruto. As he turned to begin walking, Sasuke cursed the other boy in his head for committing another of his tricks. Since Naruto was always solitary and disregarding his teammates, how were they meant to function as a team? Indeed, the more time went by, the more he seemed to despise his team. When he returned, they had to have a serious conversation. "Let's get going, Sakura. We'll have to worry about him later." As his teammates kept moving through the forest, Naruto observed from a tree branch. He was still shocked that they were duped again. It seemed like most people in this world were stupid. He leapt to a nearby branch that was slightly higher than the one he was on. With some effort, he managed to pull himself to the top, but his feet nearly lost their grip and threatened to send him tumbling. He then leapt to a different branch and landed without incident. Naruto jumped to another tree and quickly checked the location of the two idiots, trying to continue pursuing them. He was grateful that he could walk on these trees without anyone noticing because they were so tall and had thick branches. He eyed 2 trees to his left and thought softly, where to next? The trees were nearer to those fools, but he could jump to a 4th tree, which was a little bit ahead of his teammates, from a 3rd tree to his right. Naruto made a snap decision and launched himself forward, landing momentarily before launching himself again. But his timing was a little off, and as he landed again, he felt his foot slip from under him. His fingers barely found purchase on the branch he attempted to land on, but he was able to stop his fall at the last second. He saw a glade not far from where he was now, and he was hanging on for dear life. Like all the clearings in this world, it didn't seem that large. With a quick thought, Naruto released his grip with his right hand and snapped his fingers to activate the grav.con unit. He was able to flip in midair and land on the underside of the branch because his grip broke almost instantly, but the energy field had already engulfed him. He ran along the branch and changed trees again, knowing that the field would not last forever. Naruto deactivated the grav.con unit and sat down, panting, near the very top of a branch. He didn't like how close that was. "Now, where are those two?" he asked, looking down from his vantage point and realizing that, despite a few other enormous trees blocking his view, he had a clear view of the clearing. It was unfortunate that they didn't think to look up as he saw his teammates getting ready to enter it and scanning all directions for indications that they were being followed. On the opposite side of the glade, his teammates were making their way to a massive tree. There appeared to be enough room for a dozen people to hide beneath the tree's enormous roots. Naruto noticed that it was growing late as he looked up at the sky. It wasn't until now that he realized how long they had been wandering through the forest. It makes sense that the 2 fools on the ground floor were looking for somewhere to hide. Perhaps he ought to, too. Leaning his back against the trunk, Naruto raised his legs to the top of the branch, before he saw a suspicious figure moving in the forest below, skulking towards Sakura and Sasuke. He considered closing his eyes and going to bed until the following morning. For now, sleep would have to wait. This needed research. Saul was shocked that he had stalked his target all day without getting the chance to kill him, but at last, he had that opportunity. Dropping carefully from a low-hanging branch, he hid behind 2 closely spaced trees. To lessen the likelihood of being seen, he had worn a cloak adorned with patches of grass and leaves. Wearing the same type of cloaks that they carried in their bags, his fellows had left to pursue their own targets. They're both amateurs. Using a blanket he had brought with him, Saul had fashioned his cloak by hand while in this forest. It was sufficiently big and realistic to conceal him from any inquisitive eyes that might attempt to locate him. He had concealed his team's scroll in a pocket of the cloak so that no one could find it in the unlikely event that he was defeated. All he had to do now was concentrate on killing Sasuke Uchiha. Saul remained motionless for a while, moving the cloak very slowly to better conceal himself, and used a tiny monocular to observe his target. Uchiha and his pink-haired teammate were sitting beneath the roots of a big tree, ensuring that the glade was deserted and that they were secure for the night. Safe, Saul's safe did not exist. With breathless ease, he could kill a specific individual in a crowd of hundreds. Saul briefly looked away from his primary target and observed that his blonde teammate was gone, but dismissed this as unimportant. To guarantee a fatal blow, he had to rid his mind of all distractions. Saul was convinced after a moment that the two Konoha ninjas would not be moving. Setting down his monocular, he grabbed the first piece of gear he would need to construct his weapon. Saul placed the fragments of his weapon on the ground one by one, examining each one for damage that would jeopardize his kill. Unlike his amateur teammates, who continued to carry their equipment in very noticeable bags, he found none, which was to be expected given his level of expertise. Saul checked with his monocular to make sure his targets were still cowering beneath the roots, then began piecing the puzzle together. An intervention at this stage could jeopardize the entire situation, so he cautiously took another look around to be sure. Saul could not get rid of the feeling that he was being watched, even though he could see no one nearby. Perhaps it wasn't anything. Perhaps he was simply growing nervous. After all, killing a prodigy wasn't something that happened every day. To create a scope for aiming, Saul fastened the monocular to a slot on top. He then produced a steel bolt from his sleeve and installed it, adding the final details to his preferred weapon, a specially made crossbow. Saul's model, in contrast to many others around the world, was composed of lightweight metals and plastics, which allowed it to be easily concealed in fragments and carried about without raising any red flags. Saul got up slowly, just enough to position the crossbow between the trees so that passers-by wouldn't know where he was. He aimed straight at Uchiha and was ready to pull the trigger, launching the bolt into his target's eye. Eager to kill someone whose passing would be discussed for years to come, Saul held his breath and waited for the girl to step out of the way of his shot. He was reminded of a previous mission by the circumstances. He recalled lying still on a rooftop, his priceless crossbow in hand, aiming at a seat where his target would be sitting through an open window. Lying motionless for hours in a relentless storm took a lot of patience, but it was all worthwhile, just as this would be. When the girl finally stepped aside to look around, Saul had the ideal moment to pull the trigger and end yet another life. Saul froze, suddenly conscious that someone was observing him and what he was doing. But he had the ideal disguise. How could anyone be present? With his crossbow at the ready, he quickly turned around and noticed that nobody was there. How could that have happened? His acute intuition was always correct. There was nothing when he turned right, nothing when he turned left, and nothing when he turned around again. His eyes shifted to the sky, uneasy. From above came a male voice that said, "I may not like those two, but I can't let you kill them." Saul pointed his crossbow at the branch he believed was the source of the voice. Even though he was unable to see anyone, he could sense the impending attack in his bones. His crossbow was suddenly knocked out of his hands when a ball of water slammed into it. Saul acted instinctively and swiftly, trying to pick it up again until the air around him froze and became colder, causing his clothing to briefly stick to his skin before a gust of wind knocked him off his feet. Something heavy and glowing slammed into him and knocked him off his feet before he could recover. Winded, Saul fought to his feet before realizing who he was up against. The boy with the blonde hair who played on the same team as Uchiha. He had been spying on Saul the entire time, which explains why he was nowhere to be seen. This was a mistake he could not afford to make. Thankfully, Saul had other strategies besides the crossbow. "You can't stop me," he screamed, pulling his other sleeve back and hurling the steel bolt on it at his adversary. The boy slapped the thrown object aside in midair and pulled a metal weapon of some sort from a holster that hung from his belt. But Saul was sufficiently distracted to get to his feet and reach for his crossbow. He grabbed it off the ground and aimed it at the other boy, only to discover that he was also the target. The weapon he was staring at was unlike anything Saul had ever seen. It was yellow and dark brown and composed of metal. It had a hole at the end that was aimed at him, and it was oddly rectangular in shape. This was no crossbow, and Saul knew them like the back of his hands. Without taking his eyes off Saul, the boy said, "So, who the fuck are you?" With an itchy trigger finger, Saul returned the question, "What's it to you?" He ought to have fired the shot already, killing the unexpected visitor, but he was too cautious and fascinated to do so. He didn't know what the strange metal weapon could do. It might have been a heavily modified crossbow or something similar. "Just asking before I blast a hole through your head." At that, Saul arched an eyebrow. What a strange combination of words to use when discussing pulling the trigger. In any case, what could it be referring to? But that thing could not have been a crossbow. Saul was not pleased at all with the boy's menacing smirk as he lowered his weapon. Despite a feeling of dread and uncertainty about the boy's weapon's nature, he dared not glance down. He thought he heard an odd noise coming from the weapon. The boy pointed to his weapon and said, "The safety's on," with a sense of triumph. What? The safety? It's on. Huh? Saul didn't know what the safety was, but he was certain that his crossbow didn't have one. Or did it exist? He indicated that it was at the bottom or on the side by the way he pointed. Saul dropped his weapon a little in his confusion, a huge error. A sword slashed upwards before he could react, flinging the crossbow out of his hands and into the air. Saul was shocked as he looked at the offender, whose odd weapon had somehow changed into a sword and disarmed him with a single blow. He didn't understand who could make it or how something like that could change shape so quickly. After taking a step back, the boy lunged forward while wielding his sword, causing him to double over as the blade slashed sideways into his stomach. Just as his exquisitely crafted weapon landed next to him, the boy, wearing a strange metal gauntlet, twisted his upper body slightly and slammed his left fist into the back of Saul's head, sending him face first into the ground as if mocking his defeat. Saul yelled, "I ain't finished with you yet." Despite being unable to stand due to his bleeding wound, he was still able to turn around. The Konoha boy glared at him ominously as he found himself staring at his own crossbow. "But I am finished with you." He squeezed the trigger. After Sakura returned from her brief excursion, Sasuke inquired, "Did you find it?" "No," she replied with a headshake. "I backtracked all the way to the spot where Naruto disappeared, but couldn't find it. He must have taken it with him." With a silent sigh, Sasuke cursed Naruto and his antics in his mind. How could he simply vanish during such a significant event? Or accept the scroll that was handed to them? They were meant to work together. Sakura looked at the darkening sky with mild interest and asked abruptly, "What do you think he's doing right now?" "Who knows," Sasuke said with a shrug. "I'd rather not think about him. He'll be fine just like always, trust me." "I wouldn't so sure of it after what happened in Land of Waves." Sasuke sighed again and pressed his fist to his forehead, saying, "And he's perfectly fine by now. It's getting late. I'll take the first shift. Try to get some sleep. I'll wake you up in a couple of hours." "All right." Sakura fell asleep quickly, with Sasuke watching over her. For the second time today, Sasuke quietly used his Sharingan to scan the entire area in an attempt to find at least a small portion of Naruto's chakra, even if he was unable to identify it. He was reaching for a kunai when he noticed a small animal on top of a branch across the clearing, only to realize it was a squirrel. It paused every few paces to survey its surroundings, wary, until it vanished entirely. He was getting jittery here. Seeing no more use for the Sharingan, Sasuke turned it off. As unlikely as it was that someone would find them, he needed to save his chakra for later in case they were attacked in the middle of the night. In order to proceed, they hoped to locate Naruto as soon as possible. Startled, Naruto nearly fell off the branch he was sleeping on, but he stopped in time to avoid falling. After months of struggling to fall asleep, he had slept surprisingly well. Was a tree branch really this good of a bed? He moved slightly to allow his legs to hang down, stretched his arms, and yawned. Even though he wasn't a morning person, the situation went against his usual way of life. The forest was at least illuminated by the sun, which had already risen to the sky. Naruto rubbed his eyes and said, "Man, I hate mornings like this." At moments like these, he hoped to open his eyes and see Lightning and the others again, in the town of New Bottom, but he was all too aware that this would never be possible. He saw something concerning in the Gladia fight in Progressa when he pulled his hands away from his face. "Oh, for fuck's sake, I close my eyes and this happens?" Naruto got up and started searching for the best place to land. Finding a shorter tree to his right with a long branch pointing toward him didn't take him long. He would land without any problems, but there were many small branches in the way. He turned on the grav.con unit, inhaled deeply, and leapt, effortlessly navigating through the air to his destination. He was able to press himself against the tree trunk and observe the clearing with ease because of his momentum. He was shocked to realize that the three assailants were the strange trio that had sat in front of his team during the first section of these tests. Well, he said, looking thoughtfully at his chin. He was unaware of how disorganized his stubble was. Since he didn't want to risk his luck with the gunblade, he wished he had brought a shaver. Taking in the entire scene, he went on, "Don't think this is a coincidence, though. It appeared that his team had already been severely beaten and had been caught off guard during the ambush. Sakura was on her knees, being held by her hair by the other girl, and Sasuke did not look good. A situation involving hostages. Naruto had not anticipated this to be so pitiful. It was fortunate that he had taken the scroll from Sakura at that moment because without his quick thinking, they would have lost it by now. Fortunately, he had also found the other scroll they required when searching the dead assassin. However, he only knew that because of the different color. He had to come up with a plan. Sasuke had to act quickly as well because he couldn't stop these guys from getting rid of Sakura. To get a better look at the situation, Naruto walked slowly along the tree trunk. The two male members of the attacking team were at least 3 or 4 meters away from Sasuke, who was standing close to the opposite side of the clearing. He was about straight ahead of Sakura and the other girl, who were a few meters to their right and behind them. The girl did not raise her hand to stab Sakura, even though she was holding a needle. Naruto thought for a few seconds before deciding that he needed to help Sakura first, which would require some sort of distraction. His mind came up with a plan. Leaping to a large branch slightly lower than his present one, he drew his gunblade and crouched, holding the weapon steady with both hands, carefully aiming at the girl with the black hair. Bastards! Sasuke swore, staring at the two auto ninjas with his stomach in knots. Now that Sakura was out of the fray, he had no chance of defeating them. Pathetic sound waves made melee attacks more effective. He was screwed just by virtue of their haughty explanation of what they could do. It would take a miracle, or at least a brilliant plan, to win. The more normal looking one asked the one with the bandaged head, "Should we finish him off already? This is getting boring." The trio's apparent leader responded smugly, "Seeing that he is too weak to even put up a good fight, I'd say yes." Sakura's eyes were wide with fear as Sasuke turned his head slightly and snarled at them. She was being held by a girl who was grinning triumphantly and raising her hand to stab his teammate with a senbon between her fingers. The leader sighed and remarked, "This was a real letdown. I really expected the last Uchiha to be harder to beat." When Sasuke turned back to look at the two, he noticed something unexpected. Naruto had landed on a big branch at the edge of the glade, drawing his weapon and pointing it at the girl with both hands. Widening his eyes would have alerted his opponents to a problem, so he fought the urge. Naruto rose briefly from his crouched position, turned to face him, and released his weapon with his left hand. Despite the distance between them and the nausea he was experiencing, Sasuke noticed how Naruto nodded and waved briefly before crouching once more. Naruto had a talent for timing things just right. Pointing his hands at him, the ordinary-looking man asked, "Any last words before I end your life?" Experience and their explanations had taught Sasuke that he had tubes of some sort inside his arms that he could use to control sound and air pressure. Knowing full well that Naruto was just waiting for him to initiate contact, Sasuke smiled. "Just a few." He yelled, "Sakura, on my mark," as he turned to Sakura. The leader narrowed his one visible eye and snorted, "What do you think you can accomplish? Kin, take her out." Now, with a smile on her face, Kin lifted her hand to stab Sakura in the neck with the senbon. Sakura reacted quickly to Sasuke's shout, drawing a kunai and slamming her head backwards to knock Kin off balance. She was much too slow for her own good. When her grip failed, she stabbed the kunai into Kin's shin, but it didn't accomplish much either. Whoa! The sound caused the two other foreign genins to freeze, their eyes wide as they tried to figure out what could have made such a loud noise. The girl dropped her senbon and looked at her hand, which was leaking blood from where her index finger used to be, in silent horror. With her first scream of surprise, she released Sakura's hair and took her other hand. When Sakura was at last free, she leapt to her feet and kicked the already injured ninja hard in the side of the head, knocking her unconscious and sending her to the ground with a scream of pain. Alarmed by the abrupt change in roles, the two men had already turned around to observe what was going on. They noticed Naruto smirking as he stood on the tree branch and aimed his weapon at each of them. With an angry gesture toward Naruto, the leader questioned, "Who the hell are you?" The other man had done the same with his hands, prepared to strike at any time. Naruto retorted, "Riddle me this, dumbasses," and returned his weapon to its holster. Sasuke genuinely questioned why he did that. He could easily defeat both auto ninjas, but he refused to use his weapon once more. "Aren't teams supposed to have 3 genins? How many do you see now?" The air tube guy said, "Where have you been, then? Aren't teams supposed to stick together?" Snapping his fingers, Naruto was surrounded by his strange glow and said, "Oh, I've been around, I just like to keep my distance." Just as a gust of wind passed over his initial position, he leapt back and vanished behind the tree. Now that Naruto was the target of their assailants, Sasuke recognized his opportunity. Rushing forward, he backhanded the leader across the face after slugging him in the back of the head. He could have tried frying them both with a fireball if this had happened somewhere else, but he couldn't risk burning the entire forest. Now that he understood exactly why he had been so thoroughly defeated, he would prefer to stay away from hand combat. With a shout of, "You little shit!" the leader deflected a blow. In order to gain some distance from him, he swiftly rolled away and ducked under a subsequent kick. "You really need to learn when to quit. Speak for yourself." Sasuke shot back, avoiding a ferocious swing from behind and kicking him in the stomach in retaliation. He questioned why Naruto was taking so long and where he had disappeared to. Until he returned, he would have to keep these guys away from him. Sakura hurled 2 shuriken at the leader, who used his heavy metal gauntlet to block them. The girl's next attack was halted in its tracks when he sidestepped a swing and retaliated with a jab to the shoulder. He hit Sakura once more as she was getting better, this time with a confusing sound wave that stopped her almost immediately. Luckily, Sasuke was just far enough away to kick him in the back several times and avoid the attack's effects, leaving him vulnerable to further assault. Glaring at the two Konoha ninjas, the leader stumbled backwards after taking a double blow to the chest. He looked to his right, nodded, and leapt back as he was hit by another round of kicks and punches. Sasuke barely had time to realize what was happening, turned to face the other ninja he had nearly forgotten, grabbed Sakura by the shoulders, and pulled her backwards to avoid being hit by a burst of compressed air that would have sent them both hurtling. He said, "That was close," and released Sakura. Not as close as the next one. When Sasuke looked to the side, he saw the speaker smiling and pointing his hands at them. This time, there was no chance that they could move aside. The boy channeled more energy into his technique by clenching his hands into fists and pulling them back. He was prepared to blast the two of them away in a matter of seconds, frozen as they were. He reached out to them, ready to use his powers, but 3 blasts of compressed air struck him at once, knocking him sideways and directing his arms at his own teammate. He launched his own friend into a tree 10 meters backwards because it was too late to reverse the technique. "Dosu!" exclaimed the startled Auto Ninja as he saw his teammate fall down the tree trunk until he was unconscious on the ground. But how? Naruto flipped off the boy as he fell, slamming his feet first into him from above. "Already forgot about me, huh?" he asked. He turned to his comrades, and with another snap of his fingers, the glow around him vanished. Well, that was easy. Glancing at his creation, Sakura questioned, "What the hell took you so long?" Raising his right hand, Naruto gestured hazily at it. "This thing needs to recharge, you know. I am not risking serious injury by jumping from up there." Sasuke ignored the urge to give the other boy a backhand to the head and thought, well, that explains it then. Did he really need to make this so flamboyant and dramatic? His tricks put him at greater risk than his own life, but the most important thing was that all 3 of them were still alive. With his hands down, Naruto questioned, "So, what's our next move? How about dying?" "What?" He had recovered enough to point his open palm at Naruto's feet, which were still very close to him despite his earlier backflip, when the 3 of them turned to face the fallen ninja. The outcome was astounding, and under different conditions, Sasuke might have chuckled when he saw Naruto fly head over heels into a big bush 6 meters away. Sakura had already kicked Sasuke in the face and seized both of his arms, bending them behind his back so that he couldn't use his technique on anyone else before Sasuke could even restrain the fallen ninja. The man let out a painful scream, begging her to stop. Sasuke yelled, "Keep him down, Sakura," and hurried away. "I'll check on Naruto." Naruto's voice cried out, I'm all right, as his hand, covered in twigs and leaves, protruded from the bush. Happy that he had not hurt himself, Sasuke grabbed the other boy's hand and dragged him out. Wow, getting sucker punched by an idiot certainly wasn't part of the plan. The remark made Sasuke smile a little. When did Naruto's plan work out? At least you saved us. Naruto turned to him and shrugged. Well, how am I supposed to get through these exams without you guys? I even got the second scroll we needed. Wouldn't want that to go to waste. As they began to return to Sakura, Sasuke arched an eyebrow. He'd seen 2 scrolls on him, one sticking out of each pocket, but he'd ignored them until now. How and when did you do that? Saved your asses from an assassin last night, don't ask. Didn't even cross my mind. Following a brief exchange of words, Naruto gave Sasuke both of the scrolls. In order to stop Zaku from attacking them again, they tied up his arms and made the decision to head for the tower. They chose to look for something suitable among his teammates because none of them had anything useful. While Sasuke and Naruto went to search the others, Sakura remained with Zaku, holding his hands tightly despite his attempts to free them. They discovered wire strings on Kin and used them to bind Zaku's arms, but Dosu had nothing of value. Soon after, they left the clearing, believing that the Auto Ninjas would make it through the ordeal unscathed. Sakura had worried about Kin, but Sasuke and Naruto had countered that they didn't have time to worry about an enemy who had just attempted to kill them, and none of their wounds were life-threatening. The rest of the journey to the tower went smoothly. They were not attacked, and the giant, supposedly lethal animals did not appear. When they got there, it was almost dusk, and when they entered, the lobby was empty. After a brief argument, they agreed to open the scrolls as instructed, despite the warning not to do so until they were inside. As soon as they opened the scrolls, they started to smoke and fell to the ground, where they unintentionally formed a cross. I'm glad you're all okay. Iruka grinned at them. Did you have any trouble while on the way here? Sasuke shrugged and said, aside from a team of auto genins, not really, without bothering to inquire as to why he had been called by the scrolls. Auto, you say? Yes. The symbol on their headbands was a musical note. Thinking. Iruka scratched the back of his head. They must be a new village or something since I've never heard of them. I hope they didn't cause you too much trouble. The team looked at him but said nothing. It would be best to keep quiet about that. However, they did give a no by shaking their heads. So, you didn't see any other teams in the forest? Iruka smiled once more and posed a question that was starting to irritate him. They shook their heads and shrugged once more. Some had wondered about it, but they had decided to ignore it. Typically, there was a lot more conflict between teams, even within the same village. Really? 20. Some teams, and you only met one? But just one? Naruto said, well, there was that one guy who tried to kill these two, pointing to the other two. I took care of him without much of a problem. Don't know about his team, though. Iruka appeared prepared to inquire about that, but Sakura stepped in right away. So, do we pass or not? He clapped his hands and grinned once more. Huh? Oh, yeah, yes, you do pass. Congratulations, all three of you. You are the third team to get here. There are still 3 days left in this part of the exams, so you'll have to wait until then. Please, do not exit this tower or cause a ruckus while in here, understood? Understood, said Team 7 collectively. I'm counting on you, remember that. Iruka vanished with a puff of smoke, leaving them alone in the lobby once more. Happy for a break after hours of hiking, they made their way to the next room to meet the other teams that had arrived. Even though there had been very little to do in the tower, the 3 days had flown by. Naruto had mostly been reminiscing about things while actively avoiding people like rabid behemoths and gazing out of random windows. He had hardly spoken to anyone else, much less seen them. He was standing with the other genins at the moment, listening to the Hokage discuss the exams and how they would replace international conflict or something similar. He ignored the elderly man, choosing instead to let his gaze roam freely without revealing to others how uninterested he was in the speech. All 20.1 of them had assembled at a sort of arena on the upper floor. The Hokage and the assembled Junins and Chunins faced a large statue of 2 hands that resembled a hand seal. 5 large windows were behind it, the middle one being larger than the others and the upper left one being black. They were arranged in 3 ranks, with each team forming a single line. Naturally, Naruto had positioned himself in the rear, between a half-sleeping boy he vaguely remembered from the academy and a silver-haired, spectacled man. He was facing Sakura, and she was facing Sasuke. He noticed 3 faces he would prefer not to see again, the Auto Tima to his right, while he saw more familiar faces from the academy to his left. He was shocked to learn that they had located another scroll and arrived at the tower, even though one of them had probably suffered a severe concussion and another had lost a finger. Sakura is foolish for ruining a flawless headshot. When the Hokage finally stopped speaking, Naruto saw that another man had taken over. It appeared that the time had come to clarify exactly what they were expected to do. The old fart would have gone on talking for hours, he was sure of it. My name is Hayate Gecko, the man said. He briefly covered his mouth with his hand and coughed, demonstrating that he was not the healthiest person on the planet. Naruto noticed the man had bags under his eyes after squinting. Instead of telling a sick man to go home and rest, why did this village let him continue working? Since there's an unusual number of prevailing genins, we've decided to hold a preliminary round, Hayate said. These matches will be on .1 and will end when there is a clear victor. Injuring your opponent is allowed, but I and the other Junins present have the right to step in if it goes too far. We would like to avoid casualties at all costs. Am I understood? Most genins gave the same, yes, response, but Naruto pointed out that he and the boys beside him didn't. After hearing the man's explanation, he began to question whether the person who came up with this was completely sane. 20 or more applicants must have been preferable to the 10 who would be left for the third and final section of the tests. That would also ensure that the village had more Chunins, wouldn't it? Perhaps the final section of these tests was as challenging as the first. Naruto caught a glimpse of the silver-haired boy slowly and uncertainly raising his hand. To get a better look at the other boy, he cocked his head slightly. In response, Hayate said, yes, what is it? To the Junin's bewilderment, the boy inquired, can I still withdraw? He lowered his hand, winced, and held his side, saying, I'm still injured from the trek through the forest, and I fear that a fight would only aggravate my injuries. If you are sure of it, you can leave. No one is forcing you to stay, so go get some rest. Holding his side, the boy bowed his head slightly and walked away. Since Naruto had not displayed any symptoms of injury when they assembled here, It seemed a little odd to him. Perhaps he simply hadn't given him enough attention. Naruto's focus returned to Hayate as he coughed once more. He had nearly lost his sense of location. This was crucial for the time being, even though he had no interest in the exams. He pointed to the black window, which was now discovered to be a computer screen, which began quickly scrolling through the names of each genin present, with one at the top and the other at the bottom, with what Naruto, who couldn't read, assumed was the word VS in the middle. Okay, we'll use this handy computer to select the first two combatants. If your name does not come up, please leave the arena. A computer? Hold on. Naruto pondered in perplexity. He had never seen a computer and was unaware that this world had them. Since Donzo's restaurant had a television set up on the wall, he was aware that they existed, but computers? How could he have missed this? The names of the fighters remained on the screen after the computer ceased processing the names. Everyone left the arena and moved onto two long walkways that were bolted to the sides of the room, at least 10 meters off the ground, with the exception of Sasuke and a masked teammate of the person who had just left. With a set of stairs at the end, adjacent to the large entrance door, they extended from the statue's sides. Interestingly, all of the foreign teams had gathered on the right side of the statue, while the majority of the Konoha teams had gathered on the left. Even though it was the Konoha team with just 2 members left, at least they had one team to keep them company, which was a little strange. While the Hokage and the proctors of the earlier exam sections occupied the same side as the majority of Konoha ninjas, the Chunins and Junins who were not team leaders had left the room. Naruto took a seat on the railing, resting one leg on it while leaning against the wall. He was surrounded by Sakura and Kakashi, while the other teams stood farther away. I'm hoping that this won't take long. Begin. The fighters assumed their fighting positions, but they did not yet move. If he had charged at his opponent mindlessly, Sasuke would have attacked by now, but he had a feeling this guy had something up his sleeve that would prove disastrous. Yoroi's appearance was significantly hidden by the bandana. Like forehead protector, sunglasses that covered his eyes, and a mask that hung around his mouth and around his neck. He also wore what seemed to be his team's standard outfit, which included purple pants, blue sandals, purple fingerless gloves, and a high-collared, sleeveless navy blue shirt with a short, sleeved white one underneath. Sasuke automatically reached for a kunai and activated his Sharingan as Yoroi's hand reached into a pouch at his waist. He sidestepped the third shuriken and deflected the other two. A fourth one missed him by a few inches as it flew past his head. Sasuke threw the kunai at a charging Yoroi, who drew another after deflecting it with one of his own. He was able to raise it in time to stop Yoroi's swipe. He used one of his own kicks to block a kick, dodged a ferocious swing, and gave Yoroi a backwards uppercut to the chin. Yoroi staggered and had barely time to recover before he was kicked in the face. He continued to move backwards, evading or blocking every blow that was directed at him. Sasuke cursed in his mind that his Sharingan was nearly useless. If you couldn't even hit someone, what good was it to predict and mimic their movements? A genjutsu or whatever technique Naruto employed seemed so much more effective than anything he knew, and he wished he knew one that would be at least somewhat useful in this circumstance. Sasuke was momentarily distracted by his thoughts, misjudged his punch, and let Yoroi take his hand. Yoroi pushed him backwards with such force that he nearly fell off his feet after kneeing him in the gut and releasing his hand. When Sasuke let his right hand fall to his side, he created a hand seal that was exactly like the one the statue had created, enveloping it in a blue fire. Like glow. He knew, somehow, that Yoroi was smiling beneath that mask. Sasuke was aware of the increased chakra flow in the limb when using his Sharingan, and he was genuinely afraid of what it might do. Yoroi said, "You're pretty good, as expected," adopting Sasuke's fighting stance once more. "But let's see how you'll fare now." Sasuke had to continue avoiding crazed swings and kicks this time, being careful not to get touched by the glowing hand. He was reminded once more that he could not necessarily react in time just because he could predict his opponent's movements. There had already been far too many near misses. He tried to block a lucky hook, but it still found its way to his face. He was knocked off balance by the blow, but he was able to catch the next blow by grabbing the oncoming fist by the wrist just before it hit him. Unfortunately, this was the glowing hand. Sasuke let go of the hand he was holding as Yoroi kneed him in the stomach once more, saying, "This ends now." Sasuke staggered and was powerless to stop Yoroi from deftly sweeping his legs out from under him and putting him on the ground. Sasuke attempted to get up as fast as he could, but Yoroi was quicker. He squatted on top of his fallen foe and used his glowing hand to grab his forehead, pressing it against the ground. Sasuke tried to push the hand away from his head by grabbing the wrist with both hands, but he quickly realized what was happening. The first hint came when he began to struggle to keep his Sharingan active. The second came when all of his arm strength vanished. And the third and last was the familiar sensation that crept through his body like a chill running down his spine. Sasuke recognized the distinct sensation of chakra depletion and asked, "My chakra? How?" "So you noticed," Yoroi said, applying more pressure to Sasuke's forehead. Desperate to find a way out, Sasuke released his grip on his opponent's wrist and turned off his Sharingan. Without strength in his limbs, he was unable to kick or punch his way to freedom. He looked to his right and saw the proctor watching the fight critically, but he wasn't yet prepared to intervene. Looking to his left, he could hardly reach the tips of his fingers to a kunai that was right next to his hand. Immediately, he knew what had to be done. After observing the way his eyes shifted from side to side, Yoroi mockingly asked, "What are you thinking about? It's over soon, don't worry." When he eventually succeeded in hooking a finger around the kunai's grip and sliding it into his hand, Sasuke considered saying something clever, but changed his mind. He smiled broadly at his opponent, who raised an eyebrow just before the kunai's tip pierced his forearm. The blade was so weak that it hardly drew blood, but it was enough to throw off his technique and make it much easier for him to hold Sasuke's head. Sasuke used all of his remaining strength to punch Yoroi in the face with one hand and force his hand off his head with the other. As Yoroi faltered, Sasuke delivered a second blow that knocked him off his feet and onto the chilly ground. When the world began to spin in his eyes, Sasuke realized how much chakra he had lost and rolled to the side before getting to his feet. Yoroi had gotten up and leapt backwards to get some distance, and he turned to face him. "And here I thought I would never face another chakra drainer in my life." Slowly, Yoroi said, "Another," before resuming his technique and rushing forward. "Never mind, you're still no match for me." Sasuke leaned back to dodge the blow, and the glowing hand just missed his head. It was difficult for him to keep track of and avoid his opponent's attacks because his vision would not stop spinning. He couldn't even defend himself, and eventually a hit would connect, taking him out of the fight forever. What should he have done? He didn't know anything that would enable him to counterattack and escape swiftly, or did he? Recalling Kakashi's lesson from Land of Waves, Sasuke had an epiphany. He had yet to put his newly acquired ability to the test in a combat scenario, but perhaps now was the ideal moment. All he had to do was direct a specific amount of chakra to his feet, as taught by Kakashi. He dodged a wild punch and turned to run for the wall, passing the statue with Yoroi in hot pursuit. "Catch me if you can, then," he taunted. Sasuke followed instructions and concentrated chakra on his feet as he got to the wall. Satisfied that he had not forgotten how to do it, he stopped for a second before beginning to run up the wall with Yoroi. After a few seconds, Sasuke stopped when he reached the ceiling and looked at Yoroi. "Take this." He ceased directing his chakra to his feet and leapt in the direction of his oncoming adversary, striking him in the shoulder. Both of them were flung off the wall and onto the harsh floor by the impact. Quickly, Sasuke turned and kicked Yoroi in the stomach with his heel, sending him flying into the window, where he bounced and collided with the statue. Yoroi repeatedly rolled down the statue's side until he collapsed to the ground, unconscious. After using his feet to get to the wall, Sasuke ran sideways down it to lose momentum before rolling to the ground, only injuring his shoulder rather than his legs. He remarked, "Hey, I can't believe that worked," as he looked at Yoroi's unconscious body lying a short distance away. The proctor declared, "Winner, Sasuke Uchiha," to formally end the match. Naruto nodded his head silently and grinned amusedly. "Got to admit, that was pretty impressive," he said. Sakura was applauding Sasuke in front of him, and Kakashi could be heard clapping. He had chosen to sit and wait until the match was over because, even he had found it to be pretty suspenseful. Naruto left the handrail and started to move toward the big double door that was situated between the stairs at the end of the walkways. Fortunately, the door was open at the moment because two medical professionals had entered to use a stretcher to remove Sasuke's unconscious opponent. Kakashi saw the boy pass by and said, "Naruto, where are you going?" Sakura turned around, equally intrigued by his question. Naruto crossed his arms over his chest and said, "I need to go to the bathroom." Angry that he had to waste more time, he glared at Kakashi over his shoulder. After giving it some thought, Kakashi said, "Just don't take too long, okay?" The medics down below had just put the unconscious boy on the stretcher and were heading out, but not before checking on Sasuke. "I'm not sure if your fight can be delayed if you get selected, so be quick." Naruto felt it was unnecessary to state that he was unsure of the precise location of the restroom and would therefore be aimlessly searching for it for some time before locating it. "I make no promises." To remind himself where it was, he should have sketched a map or something. "Go then, but try not to be late." "Yeah, sure, whatever." Naruto then glared at them one last time before continuing to move. By the time the next two fighters were selected, He was desperate to leave the room. With a laugh, the Hokage observed, "What an unexpected choice of tactics. I can see why he was the best of the class, Iruka." Leaning on the railing, Iruka returned the smile. He felt ashamed that he had assumed the battle was over when Yoroi had defeated Sasuke. He fretted excessively. The elderly village chief asked the former proctors who were standing beside him, one on each side, "Ibiki, Enko, what do you think about the boy? Could he be a perfect candidate for promotion?" Standing on Iruka's left, Ibiki observed, "I think we should let the appropriate people give their judgment on that, Lord Hokage." I know. I think he might have what it takes, though," Enko said with a broad smile as the medical staff began removing Yoroi on a stretcher after ensuring Sasuke was okay. Sasuke, who was obviously exhausted from the fight and most likely just wanted to rest for the time being, began to ascend the wall to reach his team. Iruka nearly missed a bystander as she stared in the same direction as the other three. The only thing that caused him to turn around and see a familiar face was a faint movement in his peripheral vision. "Ah, Naruto. Where are you going?" Naruto paused and looked in his direction. "I really need to visit the bathroom and I don't want to waste too much time." "Well, don't let me hold you back then." Naruto nodded, but he realized that Iruka was not alone before he could resume his journey. He nodded at the two proctors and gave the Hokage a brief salute, which Iruka pointed out was wildly incorrect. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't notice you there, sir. Nice to see you again. Now, if you'll excuse me." He didn't say anything more and kept walking, planning to enter the doors before the medical personnel carrying Yoroi did. Enko said, "Odd boy," as Naruto started to go down the steps. Iruka sighed deeply and stared at the computer screen as it started to choose the next two fighters. "Sure is," she said. "Hope he isn't late when his name comes up." He didn't like how long it took to find the restroom. On his way to the infirmary to pick up the first wounded combatant, he had to ask a nurse for directions after nearly getting lost a few times. He had to return in case he was chosen next, but he was unsure if 1, 2, or perhaps 3 matches had gone by during his absence. He checked the time on a clock on the other wall and shut the bathroom door behind him. Almost 10 minutes had passed since he left, which was enough time for at least 2 matches to last as long as Sasuke's. He had a 1 in 14 chance of having his name mentioned if that were the case, unless it had already happened. Naruto turned away from the clock and started to return to the arena, but he was met with an irate girl staring at him as he reached for a particularly bothersome itch on his back. "And you are?" he inquired, irritated that he was facing yet another delay. He took a step back to give himself more space and a better view of the girl. She had black eyes, long black hair that reached almost to the ground, and a violet ribbon tied at the very end. She wore a pale green vest, snake, patterned pants and scarf, and a headband with a musical note on her forehead. He couldn't place her, but she looked familiar. She practically yelled, "Someone who's got a bone to pick with you," and gave him the finger. Her right hand had a bandage on it, and it appeared that the index finger was missing. "Because of you, I lost my match against that lazy idiot. I couldn't throw a single senbon accurately with one finger missing." When Naruto at last realized that she was the auto ninja whose finger he had severed in the forest, something clicked inside his head. How on earth did he lose sight of her identity? He muttered, "Oh, it's you," and pushed past her roughly. "Go away, I don't have time for you." With the full intention of reprimanding him, he heard her growl of rage as she grabbed his shoulder to stop him. Why was she unable to go bother someone else rather than him? She should actually give Sakura credit for saving her life because she was the one who caused her to be shot in the first place. "Seriously, bitch, what is your problem?" he said, turning to give her a severe look in return. For the moment, he suppressed the urge to punch her teeth in and let her choke on them. "I have a name, it's Kin, so use it. I don't care what your name is. You are a bitch and that's what I'm calling you." "So does that mean I get to call you an asshole? Be my guest." They glared at one another for a while before Naruto turned to go after realizing he was wasting time once more. He had just taken 3 steps when Kin stopped him again, this time by moving ahead of him and separating herself from him with her wide arms. "You are not going anywhere until you've answered for what you've done." With a sigh, Naruto placed his right hand on his gunblade, prepared to draw it the instant the girl made an attempt. "Will you stop yelling already? Besides, it's your own fault you attacked my team. You're lucky I missed when I did. Otherwise you'd be lying dead on the ground with a hole in your head." "What?" The first part was clearly a lie, but the girl didn't seem to realize it. "Look, bitch, I'm sorry you lost, but you brought this upon yourself." He pulled out his gunblade and pointed it at her to make it clear that he wasn't joking, which he was because he didn't want to waste another bullet on her. "Now, please, stop bothering me before I blast a hole through your head," he said. "You are angry over the loss of your finger, which is understandable. but screaming at me won't bring it back. Leave me alone. Goodbye. Naruto pushed the girl away with force, holstered the gunblade, and started to walk again, hoping he would remember the way back without needing guidance from others. Kin screamed after him, "This isn't over. You hear me? This isn't over, asshole." And he merely gave her the finger. A fight between two boys, one wearing green and the other with a large gourd strapped to his back, was about to end when Naruto arrived. Naruto found it difficult to keep up with the green one because he was moving so quickly. His opponent, meanwhile, was motionless and allowing some sort of sand to block all of his attacks. With tears in his eyes from the exciting battle, Naruto went up the stairs to his left and headed to his team, giving Iruka a slight nod as he went. Iruka and Mizuki were two of the few people he believed were okay, even though he didn't like many others. He didn't really get to know them during the month he had them as teachers, but that was sufficient for him. Kakashi and another Junin wearing the same green outfit as the genin on the arena disappeared in a puff of smoke as he was within 10 steps of his team. He took a moment to realize that the two Junins had intervened to stop a serious injury and that the match was already over. He truly wanted to watch the fight, so it's a shame. When Naruto arrived at his team, he walked past them to lean against the railing and steady himself with his hands, asking, "So what have I missed?" His voice carried a trace of excitement. Sasuke looked at him and asked, "In order or just in general?" "In general." Naruto chose to spare those two the trouble because he was certain they couldn't even recall the fights in chronological order. "Well, you missed my fight," Sakura sighed deeply. "Double knockout against Ino." Naruto's only response to the statement was to raise his eyebrows. In all honesty, he had assumed Sakura would lose right away against anyone. Maybe Ino was as worthless as she was, or maybe she wasn't as worthless as he had assumed. "You also missed Shino's fight with the auto ninja who could throw blasts of air around. Then there was some family drama between Hinata and her cousin. She almost got killed." "Interesting. What else?" Sasuke scowled at his disregard for this Hinata girl but remained silent. There was a fight between Tenten and Temari, and... Unfamiliar with both names, Naruto interrupted, "Who and who? Do you actually even want to know who they are?" He sheepishly rubbed the back of his head, wondering why he had even asked the dumb question. "I guess not. Anyways, you were saying?" Sakura pressed her hand to her face as Sasuke sighed and carried on where he had left off. Sakura was asked, "There was also a fight between Kankuro from Suna and Masumi. Am I forgetting someone?" She responded without hesitation, "I think she was called Kin, and there was that fight between Shikamaru and that Auto girl. Right after you left. It was one of the shorter ones." Naruto said, "Yeah, and the bitch blames me for it," while shaking his head. He continued, "Met her on the way here. Kept insisting that it was my fault she lost," feeling his teammates' curious looks pierce him. "Please, tell me you didn't hit her." Wanted to, but sadly didn't. Kakashi reappeared with a puff of smoke directly beside them. He grinned and said, "Oh, Naruto, you're back?" Naruto believed he was doing that because you could never tell with his mask on. "You missed quite a lot of the fights." "I know," Naruto shrugged in response. His slight smile disappeared as he thought of something. "By my count the one that just ended was the 8th, right? 2 more, then," he said. "Wait, how long was I away?" "About 15 minutes or so. You're lucky your name didn't come up in the meantime." One more shrug. Naruto caught a glimpse of Sakura looking up at the computer screen, indicating that it had begun to cycle through the final 4 names. He realized he had neglected to inquire about the identities of the previous 2 fighters as he followed her lead and turned his own gaze to the screen, but dismissed the idea as useless. Naruto, who had almost started to regret not learning to read the alphabet in this world, turned to his teammates to see if his name had appeared when the screen stopped again. "Not you," shook Sasuke's head in agreement. "It says, Dosu Kinuta versus Choji Akamichi." He turned around and climbed onto the handrail, leaning against the wall as he had done 15 minutes earlier. "So, I get to be last, huh? Works for me," he said. From the opposite side of the room, he saw the familiar, slightly stooped figure of the final surviving Auto Genin begin to descend to the arena floor. Naruto turned to face the other fighter, a plump boy in a red suit with plated armor on his arms, upper legs, and torso. He had brown hair that hung down to his waist. He thought, this would be interesting. Maybe this would compensate for all the other exciting battles he had missed. Dosu patiently awaited the proctor's announcement that the match had begun. Despite his teammates' humiliating losses, he had already assessed the fat older boy and decided that a straightforward, paralyzing counterattack with his melody arm would be sufficient to win this battle and demonstrate that his team was not made up of pushovers. The proctor asked, "Both of you ready?" before clearing his throat. Dosu questioned why a sick man was chosen to serve as the proctor, but he and his opponent both nodded. After giving them both a quick glance, the proctor swiftly lowered his raised hand. Begin. When his opponent's teammates called out to him, Dosu was about to assume a fighting stance, but he paused to listen before acting. The black-haired boy who had beaten Kin yelled, "Do your best," but where was Kin? Through his cunning. "Go, fatty," the girl with the blonde hair enthusiastically added. Dosu observed the fat boy twitching angrily, gritting his teeth and mumbling that he had instructed them not to refer to him in that way. Yes, Dosu would mercilessly exploit a berserk button. Dosu rubbed his right wrist expectantly and said, "Should I end this quickly, Mr. Fatty?" The Konoha boy glared at him, his eyes blazing with rage, and he grinned gleefully. His tone was dangerous as he asked, "Are you talking to me, you bandaged imp? I don't see anyone else who I would be addressing as that, fatso." As the boy narrowed his eyes, Dosu heard something snap inside him and could almost see flames in them. He created a seal that looked like a ram's hand, similar to the statue to Dosu's right, and then another that looked like a bird seal. "That's it, you are really going to get it now," he said. When Dosu saw the technique's results, his smile vanished in an instant, and he took 2 uncontrollable steps back. The fatty had at least doubled in size, with his limbs largely unchanged but his torso swollen. He had the appearance of a gigantic balloon on legs. He was so surprised that Dosu didn't exploit the clear dot-cut opportunity that would have immediately ended the match. It was only when the fatty's head and limbs abruptly tucked in and chakra began to shoot outward that he snapped out of his daze and began to move forward like a boulder of fat, directly toward the startled Otto Genin. Just before the enormous boulder of doom crushed him like a bug, Dosu was able to jump to the side. In a startling display of agility, the rolling ball swiftly reversed course. Eyeing the wall beneath the walkway his team had gathered on, Dosu dodged once more, realizing exactly what he had to do to win. The rolling mass of fat turned wide and began to approach him once more, and he ran directly at it. He had a strategy that would guarantee his victory, even though some might have thought he was insane for going straight after his opponent at this point. Dosu dodged the human boulder at the last second and continued running until he was facing the rolling pile of lard that was approaching him, his back to the wall. He waited calmly for the boy to approach, alert for any slight shift in direction that might have made it more difficult for him to dodge in either direction. Dosu sidestepped and stopped, and the Konoha boy, who had learned nothing, crashed into the wall half a second later. His limbs popped back out, and the chakra flow that had been driving him forward stopped. Dosu laughed as he appreciated his craftsmanship and the shocked expressions the fatso's teammates were giving him across the room. Everything had gone as planned. The older boy was unaware of how simple his defeat had been. By pressing his right hand against his motionless opponent and flicking his left index finger against his melody arm, Dosu produced a powerful sound wave that instantly knocked out his opponent and kicked up a cloud of dust and dirt. The boy had regained his normal size and was unconscious on the ground when the cloud settled. Dosu was unsure whether the boy could hear him, but he felt like gloating. "I'm not sure if you were even aware of what I could do," he said, looking triumphantly at his fallen opponent, "but making yourself bigger was the last thing you should have done against me. 70% of the human body is composed of water, and water transmits sound. The bigger you are, the easier it is for me to defeat you. Winner. Dosu Kinuta," the proctor declared as he went to see how the plump person was doing. Dosu gave a silent nod and began walking in the direction of his own team, but he paused briefly when his sensitive ears detected a slow clapping coming from the Konoha side of the arena. As his teammates looked at him as if he had gone crazy, he noticed a boy sitting on the railing with his back to the wall, cheering at his accomplishment. The blonde child who had saved his friends just in time was clapping, and he was shocked to see that the team was the same one his own had attacked in the forest. "How fascinating. Naruto, what the hell?" Sakura's question went unanswered by the clapping boy. Upon the conclusion of the brief match, he found it difficult to contain his laughter. Certainly worth all the fights he had missed, he thought. Not that he cared about his teammates other than the fact that he would have to put up with their stupidity for the rest of his life, but he hadn't anticipated finding himself cheering a foreign ninja who had attempted to kill them. His eyebrow went up as he said, "I'm not allowed to applaud or something?" "Well, yes. But Choji is our friend, not mine." Sakura let out a sigh and stopped talking after realizing that arguing with him was useless. If she wasn't going to finish the argument, why even feel the need to start one? Sasuke started, "You know, Naruto," and Naruto nearly moaned. "You really need to lighten up. Most of the time, you're acting like the whole world is against you." "What if that's what I feel like?" "Ah, that's good to know, Naruto," Kakashi said, grinning beneath his foolish mask once more. "We are finally getting to know you better." With a moan, Naruto buried his face in his hands and shook his head. He obviously didn't care about them, so why did everyone try to be so nice? Seriously though, added Sasuke. Stop moping around. I mean, my family was killed years ago, and do you see me acting like that? You at least had one. Naruto shot back, gesturing to the other boy, growing irate at the ongoing irritation that went by the name of Sasuke Uchiha. Mine died when I was born. His teammates' faces showed confusion, and he realized he was giving away more information than he wanted to. He knew he would end up blurting out information he didn't want to share, which was why he disliked getting upset over fools like them. Sakura remarked, perplexed, I thought you had a mother. Adoptive one. As if to highlight his next point, Naruto reached for the tip of his cape and held it out to the side. This coat is a replica of hers. I still think my pants don't go together with it, though. Pointing to the questioned hand, Sasuke questioned, and that glove of yours? Gift from her. At last, the medics had placed Choji on a stretcher and were on their way. It was time for him to stop talking and get ready for his own battle. He quickly silenced the three idiots with a wave of his hand as he stepped down from the railing because he could practically feel the questions they were going to ask him. Look, I don't want to talk about it and I have a match right about now. As it started going through the names once more, they looked up at the screen. There were only two whose names hadn't yet appeared, so Naruto questioned why it even cycled through all the names. Who created this? The final two names were displayed on the screen before the computer shut down in 5 seconds. Sasuke read aloud, Naruto Farron vs Kiba Inuzuka, even though Naruto was aware that his name was displayed on the screen. Though he was the only one who hadn't yet had his match, Kiba was a complete surprise. Naruto turned to Sasuke and said, Kiba would be the jerk I threw your book at, right? The very same. Naruto had hoped that he would never have to deal with the dog boy again, but it appeared that luck was not on his side. Oh, goody. Wish me luck, he said, his smile tinged with phony excitement. You didn't wish either of us luck, so why should we? Replied Sakura. Oh, good point. After a moment of silence, Kakashi asked, looking at the motionless boy in bewilderment, why are you still here? You should be going already. Naruto leaned back just enough to see that Kiba had just descended the stairs and would shortly be at his assigned spot. In a moment, he said. Sasuke responded, deadpan, you're going to jump down, aren't you? Kakashi arched an eyebrow, appearing both interested and concerned. Naruto smirked, laughed lightly, and leaned back until he flipped over the railing, snapping his fingers in the process. In an instant, he spun around and sank softly, glowing blue. He stopped glowing after the grav.con unit deactivated with another snap of his fingers. Even though he could practically feel eyes on him, he chose to ignore it because he had a match to concentrate on. Looking at each of them separately, Hayate questioned, both of you ready? After receiving 2 nods, he lowered his raised hand. Begin. Naruto crossed his arms over his chest and stared at Kiba, unable to get rid of the feeling that he needed to keep an eye on Kiba during this battle. Back on Grand Pulse, where Gorgonopsids and other threats lurked behind every rocka, sometimes literally, it was an odd but familiar feeling. Kiba mocked, adopting the same posture as everyone who had attended the academy, not attacking, huh? Naruto remained silent. Silently choosing a sequence on his mana drive, he turned sideways while maintaining eye contact with the dog boy and unbuttoned his coat. He also unbuckled the coat's belt, and as he moved clumsily from foot to foot, he could see Kiba was hesitant and not feeling like attacking just yet. For what reason was he waiting? He was about to grab his gunblade when Kiba yelled, Akamaru, now. What? Before Naruto could react, he felt teeth dig into his arm, just below the elbow. Wide-eyed, he made a desperate attempt to shake off his assailant, whom he identified as the large dog Kiba was frequently spotted with. He yelled angrily at the proctor, who was standing a few meters away like a statue, hey, what the shit? Wasn't this supposed to be a one-on-one match? Simply put, the dog is not forbidden from helping, Hayate stated. Sorry. Naruto turned to see Kiba on his hands and knees like a dog, his fingernails grown to the length of claws. Naruto was still being bitten by his devoted pet as he prepared to charge. All along, this was his plan. In an instant, Naruto pulled the dog along by yanking his right hand to the left and pressing his glowing left hand against the dog's side. Its fur ignited from the blazing ball of fire a moment later, and it released his arm, rolling on the ground and yelling in fear as it attempted to put out the fire. Kiba exclaimed in disbelief, no, Akamaru, as he extended one hand to his cherished pet. How? Naruto swore at his opponent while furiously examining the bloody smudges the dog's teeth had left behind. Now he understood why he had suddenly felt a sense of dread. He ought to have exercised more caution. Kiba questioned incredulously, "How did you do that?" Naruto muttered, "Magic," more to himself than to Kiba. He felt a small amount of pity for the large animal as he watched it burn in the flames. Perhaps it was because he had seen a Laik for the first time on a visit to a research site in Yasha's Massif, but it was unusual for him to even care about animals. Fortunately, only his hair caught fire and was quickly extinguished after the small spook threw a fireball at him when he got too close. Dimming the light from the focusing lens in its palm, Naruto reset the remaining sequence on his mana drive and swiftly selected a new one. The last of the flames were put out when he jerked his hand toward the agitated dog, causing 2 water balls to shoot out of it. The dog, whose once white fur had turned black and charred, seemed to sigh with relief but did not get up from the ground. "Now that that's out of the way," said Naruto, "shall we continue?" Way ahead of you. Kiba slammed his shoulder into Naruto's back, knocking him off his feet before he could turn around. "Now I know why you asked about that glove of his." Sasuke caught a glimpse of Kakashi nodding his head while holding a fist to his chin. Had Kakashi not previously seen Naruto hurl water or fire from his hand? Although the shocked gaping spoke differently, Sasuke had been certain that everyone knew he could do that. Kakashi went on, "It is an impressive device," as Naruto was rising from the ground following Kiba's shoulder tackle. "Do you know what else it might do?" Sakura turned away from the fight to glare at their teacher, saying, "Please, can you just watch the fight to the very end before you ask? Please?" It appeared that she disliked Kakashi's interruption as well. "If you say so." Sasuke stayed silent and gazed at the fight that was still going on. Naruto had no time to defend himself after Kiba launched a flurry of attacks. Even after setting Akamaru on fire as if it were nothing, Naruto hadn't yet drawn his weapon, suggesting that he wasn't taking this seriously. At least he extinguished the fire before the dog could perish. Kiba screamed, "Stay still," and barely missed with another swipe. Naruto asked and leapt backwards, "Why should I? Seems counterproductive to me." Naruto retreated a few more steps before he felt a big, heavy object press against his back. As he turned to prepare for another surprise attack, he saw that his team was standing just beneath a concrete wall. Now that his dog was out of the fray, perhaps this had been Kiba's plan from the beginning. He had to admit it was pretty clever. "Now I have you exactly where I want," Kiba declared, his desire for victory and retribution barely restrained. Naruto caught a glimpse of him charging forward, spinning like a drill, until all he could see was a colorless, spinning mass that was directly approaching him. He stood motionless, his face contorted in fright, and the only thought he could think was the word, "Fuck," repeated over and over again. Kiba slammed into the wall, but Naruto was able to recover in time to move aside. To his dismay, Kiba had made a deep indentation in the wall that extended from Naruto's former position to the closest corner, rather than knocking himself out like the fat boy had done. Kiba had halted for the time being in an attempt to get his bearings. In order to end this match immediately, Naruto considered drawing his gunblade and exploding a hole through Kiba's body. When he saw that Kiba's had not entirely missated, the tip of his cape was torn, he gave up on the idea. If he hadn't noticed the red fabric fragments on the floor near where Kiba had made his initial contact with the wall, he probably wouldn't have noticed. It seems that his cape wasn't as fortunate when he ducked, getting caught in the attack and tearing at least a quarter of it to pieces. Kiba formed a drill and charged again, and Naruto scowled and glared at him. He suddenly found it less appealing to end this with a simple pull of the trigger. Just as Kiba crashed into the space he had occupied, Naruto leapt to the side and ran up the wall, snapping his fingers to activate the grav.con unit. He sprinted across the walkway's underside, flipped over the edge, and landed on the handrail horizontally. He removed his coat and threw it away without looking down, as he didn't want to see more harm done to it. He felt that the fight was going to be a bitch, which is why he had unbuckled and unbuttoned it in the first place. Now, what is the best way to get rid of a bothersome fool? Sakura yelled, "Naruto, what are you doing?" as Sasuke removed the flung coat from his face. The cape was torn, Kakashi observed. Naruto said calmly, going to kick his ass, as he turned to face the ceiling. "He should be grateful I decided to save that stupid dog of his." "Naruto, don't be a petty, vengeful guy," Sasuke said sharply, clutching the abandoned coat. "Can't change what I am." He jumped backwards a moment later, narrowly avoiding a kunai that was thrown at him, and landed on the ground just as the glow went out. No one in particular was asked by Sasuke, "What the hell is wrong with him?" Naruto was attempting to hold Kiba at bay down below by avoiding and retaliating against his blows. Kakashi remained silent and watched the battle intently. He was curious as to why Naruto always began to glow after jumping or climbing. Did his finger snapping have anything to do with it? Did it have anything to do with his glove? In order to walk on vertical surfaces, why didn't he simply direct his chakra to his feet? Even though he hadn't been present when Kakashi taught his teammates the technique, he must have known it existed. Kakashi felt bad for doubting Naruto after witnessing how well he was defeating Kiba. Kakashi had been afraid that any fight with Zabuza would end the same way after witnessing the aftermath of his battle with his accomplice. His skepticism appeared to be unfounded, as Naruto was more than capable of defeating his opponent in spite of his injured arm. Interestingly, when Naruto wasn't blocking or punching, he always had his right hand ready to grab his weapon. Why haven't I drawn it yet? Kakashi asked himself. There were a lot of questions. Kiba barely escaped a kick after taking an elbow to the face. He was beginning to see that his strategy wasn't working as planned. Naruto was good enough to counter every move he made while avoiding or blocking them all. If only he and Akamaru were still fighting. He was almost hit in the jaw by a fist, but he was able to back away as it passed. He was losing even though he was supposed to be the superior close-range fighter. He would lose quickly if he didn't increase his offensive effort. When his opponent approached for another hook to the face, Kiba swung a kunai horizontally at him from a small pouch on his waist. Naruto froze in place, narrowly avoiding a second slash that was headed for his chest. Naruto taunted, "And here I thought you were out of tricks," as he walked calmly backwards and leaned away from the attacks. "Took you long enough." Kiba shouted, "Shut up," and hurled the kunai, then he quickly pulled out another to replace it. Naruto leapt out of the way and allowed the blade to pass by him unharmed. But as he was doing it, Kiba saw what was on the floor, just behind the obnoxious blonde. Akamaru. He had a plan in mind and already felt guilty for using his beloved partner in such a degrading manner, but he was sure he would forgive him. Kiba increased the speed of Naruto's backward movement by speeding up his swings. With just a meter separating him and Akamaru's prone form, Kiba smirked triumphantly, confusing his opponent. Akamaru yelled quietly and landed on Naruto's back after he stumbled over him a second later. Had Naruto not been able to seize him by the wrists with the blade just inches away, Kiba would have jumped over his companion and stabbed his kunai into his shoulder. They struggled, and despite Naruto's best efforts to stop it, the tip of the kunai kept approaching his shoulder. Kiba was aware that his injured arm was making his efforts even less effective. The kunai would sink in a matter of seconds because he was the weaker of the two in terms of physical strength. Not so arrogant now, huh? Naruto's eyes widened in surprise and then narrowed in rage in a split second. With a growl, he allowed the kunai to stab the floor just above his shoulder before using his metal-clad left hand to punch Kiba in the chin and headbutt him. A boot landed in Kiba's groin, and a glowing figure flipped over him, using him as a springboard and knocking him to the ground as Kiba, dazed, heard him snap his fingers. Kiba seized the kunai and rose to confront Naruto as he snapped his fingers once more, but this time, Naruto was pointing the odd metal object at him after taking it out of the holster that hung from his belt. He frowned and said, "Any last words before I splatter your brains all over the place?" Kiba had a feeling it wouldn't be pretty, but he didn't know what he meant. From his position, Sasuke screamed, "Naruto, don't do it," with an oddly distressed tone. Naruto screamed back, "Shut up," and turned to give his teammate a menacing glare. "Did I start yelling during your fight?" Kiba saw his opportunity and quickly moved to get in front of Naruto, slapping the metal object aside before slamming into his shoulder, nearly knocking him off his feet. Kiba was knocked off balance long enough for Naruto to kick him in the back after he spun aside and struck his head with the side of his metal weapon, taking advantage of the momentum. Kiba swiftly spun around and threw the kunai, just missing his target but allowing him enough time to charge again, drawing and throwing a shuriken. To his credit, Naruto didn't even wince as the shuriken smashed into his thigh as it passed by. After dodging a ferocious swing, Naruto delivered another back kick in retaliation. A lightning strike from above caused Kiba to twitch and spasm uncontrollably just as he turned around for another chance. Almost immediately after, a second bolt struck, knocking him to his knees and creating a gaping hole that Naruto wondered why he hadn't exploited it earlier. Kiba stopped twitching and whispered, "H.how are y.ud? Doing T. This." Though he wasn't sure Naruto could hear him stuttering. From behind him, he heard an odd noise that sounded like metal on metal. His breath steamed as snow and ice formed around him almost as abruptly as the lightning bolts. He shivered as the snow froze onto his skin and clothing, then melted a moment later. Kiba got up, turned around, and charged again, not caring what questions he wanted to ask. Naruto swerved to the side and allowed him to pass him at the last second. Kiba stopped when he felt cold steel cut across his upper arm and left shoulder. To make sure he wasn't dreaming, he slowly pushed his trembling hand to touch the long, shallow cut that was bleeding lightly as he stared down at it in shock. He winced as his fingers touched the wound, wondering how it had even come to be. He could hear gasps from the audience thanks to his enhanced hearing, and he could only respond when he turned to face his opponent. Naruto's hands now held a sword. "Did you see what I just did?" "Yes. Yes, I did." Sasuke. Trying to hide his own surprise was difficult for Kakashi. He had been too preoccupied, like everyone else, to look at Kiba after the first lightning bolt had suddenly struck him. It never occurred to him that Naruto could do more than hurl water and fire out of his hand. What a wonderful thing that glove was. When he finally said, "I think that explains something," Sakura turned to him and asked, "Like what?" She patiently waited for Kakashi to respond, but her eyes continued to stray to the side as she tried to monitor the fight as much as she could. "Back in Land of Waves, I inspected the body of the ninja who fought Naruto on the bridge." Sasuke turned his head slightly to face Kakashi and said, "The guy who beat him up? What about him?" He permitted himself to look to his right to make sure no one was overhearing them. "If you'd let me finish. Besides, the beating was pretty mutual going by the state of the body, but that is not what I was talking about. Fortunately, everyone was watching the fight, but you never know." Yes. Their impatience irritated Kakashi, who sighed. "Before the villagers cleaned up the bridge and buried the bodies, I inspected the body. While the cause of death was the same as the demon brothers, there was a large gash on his back that I couldn't explain since it had clearly been caused by a blade, and Naruto didn't have one. Or so I had thought." "I see." As their concern for Kiba's safety grew, they returned their focus to the battle. Naruto was on the verge of doing more damage with his wild swings, even though he had failed to hit after the first time. Although Kakashi could see that Naruto was not accustomed to using a sword in battle, he was still capable of slicing Kiba to pieces if given the opportunity. Sakura whispered, "I hope they don't kill each other," and the others couldn't help but concur. Given that the question had just been aimed at him, Naruto felt strange when he said, "Stay still, will you?" As Kiba avoided another of his crazed blows, Naruto scowled. He became aware that this fight was becoming much longer than he liked. He had to figure out how to get this done fast. A kunai was hurled at him, but he sidestepped and avoided it. Then he turned and attempted a low, horizontal cut that, had Kiba not leapt back, would have struck his ankles. Kiba's upper left arm was nicked by the subsequent attack, but he leapt to the right before the blade could even draw blood. Unfortunately for Naruto, Kiba caught his arm in mid-strike, elbowed him in the chest, and wrenched the gunblade out of his grasp as he pulled the sword back and attempted another blow. Naruto was disarmed and had to avoid his own weapon. If he hadn't been so upset with Kiba for having the audacity to steal it, he would have laughed at the irony of it all. Lightning had given the flamberge as a gift, and now it was in the possession of a grumpy fool. It was an unforgivable error, but fortunately he knew how to retrieve it. Naruto ducked under one of Kiba's clumsy swings, demonstrating that Kiba was even less skilled with a sword than he was. Naruto felt like lightning because of how awful his savage fighting style appeared. However, if he struck, he could still cause serious injuries. Naruto made the decision to execute his plan, dropping low to evade a horizontal attack and then rising just in time to block the subsequent blow. Naruto grabbed Kiba by the forearm and swiftly used his other arm to flick the switch that caused the gunblade to change modes, defying expectations that he would counter and disarm his opponent. To his delight, Kiba went for an overhead slash as soon as he was pushed backward. Knowing Kiba was unaware that the weapon had changed and would not be able to reach its target, Naruto remained where he was. Kiba's shocked expression was priceless. Before he could even process what had happened, Naruto snatched up the gunblade, dragged Kiba toward him, and kicked him away while yanking his priceless weapon back. Seeing an opening that would finally put an end to this fight, he flicked the switch once more and charged before waiting for it to stop changing. Kiba had sufficiently recovered to raise and draw another kunai to deflect the blade. Naruto just pressed harder, causing the much larger blade to slide along the smaller one until it moved past the tip and stabbed into his already injured left shoulder, so it didn't work nearly as well as planned. Naruto took a step back for another swing, but Kiba screamed in agony and attempted to swipe at him with his kunai. Knowing that his mana drive could handle the weapon, Naruto grabbed it by the blade and repeatedly struck Kiba in the face with the bottom of his gunblade's hilt. He doubled over, and Naruto stabbed his blade into the injured shoulder from the side after kneeing the dog boy in the groin and spinning him around as the kunai fell out of his loose grasp. He yelled, "It's over, Fleabag," as he kicked Kiba in the face and withdrew the blade. Kiba struggled to stay upright and attempted to halt the bleeding, but he was powerless as Naruto continued his assault, causing even more agony with a kick to the hand that was pressed against the heavily bleeding wound. Before the gunblade nicked his shoulder one final time and Naruto's metal-clad fist hit him in the jaw, another kick to his side sent him reeling sideways. As his opponent stopped, Naruto spun around and away, aimed the flamberge at him, flicked the switch, and put the weapon back in its holster. Kiba was barely able to stand after the match, and his dog was still on the ground 10 or so meters away. He was victorious. Kiba stared at him with a peculiar look of fear and defiance in his eyes until his legs finally failed and he collapsed, leaving the floor red with blood. After declaring, "Winner, Naruto Farron," Hayate hurried to examine Kiba. He and his dog were approached by 2 pairs of medics who rushed into the room. Unconcerned, Naruto turned around and walked up the wall with the Grav.Con unit to where his team was. When Kakashi saw Naruto lose his weapon to Kiba, he thought he would be at a disadvantage without it, so he moved to lean on the handrail like Sasuke and Sakura were doing. How mistaken he'd been. He was impressed by Naruto's ability to quickly turn the tide against Kiba by eliminating Akamaru first and then defeating Kiba in close quarters. Moreover, Naruto's peculiar weapon was fascinating. Nothing that could change from a sword to whatever the other form was something he had never seen or heard of. All he could think about was where he had obtained Ida was it another present from his enigmatic adoptive mother. The list of unresolved issues continued to increase. Sakura muttered, "I didn't think he'd be that brutal," appalled at Kiba's state. Sasuke raised an eyebrow and said, "Didn't he brutally beat up the ice ninja back in Land of Waves?" Sakura responded, "Well, yeah, but he was an enemy out to kill us all," as Naruto started to glow beneath them. "Kiba isn't the nicest guy in the world, but he is still our friend. If he's unlucky he'll never be able to use that arm again." With a snap of his fingers, the glow around Naruto disappeared as he leapt over the railing. After that, the conversation abruptly stopped, and when he put his coat back on, nobody spoke. While the medics hurried Kiba and Akamaru out of the room, they stood silently for a while, gazing down at the arena floor as the Hokage moved to his position in front of the statue, flanked by the former proctors. "Will the winners of these preliminaries please come down and form a row? I will tell you what you need to know about the finals." Naruto let out a loud sigh, clearly annoyed that he had just climbed up without cause. Just as he was about to snap his fingers and leap down once more, Kakashi had an idea. He had not had the opportunity to inquire about the glow and how it enabled him to defy gravity when necessary. Trying to use his Sharingan on his own student felt wrong, especially since he could just ask later. Glistening again, Kakashi pulled up the headband from over his eye, making it appear as though he was attempting to remove an itching sensation, while Naruto leapt down and dragged Sasuke along with him over the edge before he could escape. Mystified by what he saw, he had to suppress the strong impulse to gasp in shock right away. Seeing him twitch, Sakura said, "Kakashi, are you all right? You seem troubled." Kakashi turned to her in a flash, grinning broadly. He rubbed his hand against his eye as if he had been doing that all along. "Just a persistent itch I can't seem to get rid of," he said. "Oh, okay then." Kakashi removed his Sharingan and lowered the headband. Since the Sharingan was typically only found among the Uchiha clan, he had always questioned whether Sasuke was aware that he had one, but the question had no relevance in comparison to the one that now consumed his thoughts. Just what did he see? The Hokage told Ibiki, "Congratulations on your victories, all of you," and handed him the wooden pipe he always appeared to smoke. As before the first match, the 9 winners had gathered in a line, standing shoulder to shoulder. Naruto, barely able to control his annoyance, stood close to the left end of the row. He wanted to go home, perhaps have his arm checked first, and then take a nap. "You all should get some rest and prepare for the finals. They will be held in the stadium at the outskirts of our fine village after a 1-month break. You will be watched by various dignitaries, so be sure to give your best performance. Any questions you would like to ask me?" Sasuke held up a hand. He was the farthest person on Naruto's left side of the row. Sasuke lowered his hand as the Hokage nodded his head. "Not that I'm complaining, but why the month-long break? It lets you prepare yourselves for the finals and will be very important if you wish to become Chunins. 1 month is also enough time for you to recover from any injuries sustained today." Naruto, like many others, thought the explanation made sense and nodded. Although he was happy to have some free time, he was unable to ignore the sense of impending doom that was growing. He would have been in this village for a total of 4 months at the time of the finals. 4 of those months would have been spent away from lightning. He was getting nervous about it. "Any other questions?" The Hokage nodded, and everyone shook their heads. Taking his pipe from Ibiki, he said, "You are free to leave, then. Good luck to every one of you," and led the proctors out. Soon everyone was following, leaving the forest and tower behind. As they strolled down a street, Sasuke said, "So, does any of you want something to eat?" Even though they had already been told to go home, the 4 of them were still together, so this was an unusual moment for them. "I know a great place that serves ramen." "Ramen Ichiraku. Heard of it? Tempting, really, but that's, like, halfway across town." No need to go that far, Naruto replied. On their way out of the tower, they had had his arm examined, and after the wound was cleaned and his arm was bandaged, they were informed that it wouldn't be too serious. Old man Danzo's is just around the corner. How do you even know Elder Danzo in the first place? Sakura inquired. He's been kind of taking care of me ever since I ran away from the orphanage when I was 4. Ran away? Why? Why would you do that? Why would I not have? I just grew sick of that place. I always wanted to see the world beyond the boring orphanage yard, but to do that people would have had to adopt me. Naruto grumbled. And people rarely visited, and when they did, they paid more attention to the more cheerful kids than the one kid moping in the corner. So, one night I decided to leave that place for good. Can't say that I regret that decision. Better on the streets than in there. At least now I don't have to hear the little brats noting I resembled the 4th Hokage ever again. He grumbled quietly to himself, scowling. Every single fucking day. Before realizing the others had stopped, Naruto continued to walk for a few more meters while clenching his fists. He turned to see them tilting their heads from side to side, staring at him intently. They would have drawn a little too much attention if the street hadn't been deserted. Sakura laughed a little and said, "You know, you really do resemble him. The same spiky, blonde hair and all. This is so hard to believe." With wide eyes, Sasuke continued, "You're like a younger version of him. Do you know if you are related or something?" "No," Naruto snapped back. "I don't really care even if I was. Besides, if I actually was the son of a Hokage, do you really think I'd have had to live in an orphanage?" They were obviously trying to think of an answer, but none of them had one. Naruto squinted and said, "Can we get going already? I'd rather not hear any more comparisons." They went back to their quiet stroll until they turned a corner and Sakura felt compelled to inquire about something that was bothering her. "Why are there so many abandoned buildings in this neighborhood? I mean, the houses on our right are inhabited, but across the street." Naruto pointed to an old, boarded up house on their left and explained, "After the Nine Tails rampage, people left and just never came back. There used to be a house, or maybe 2, next to it, but that one did burn down." He pointed to a dilapidated house on their right, just past their destination. "That one almost burned down that day. And that one there was robbed of almost all of its furniture. Before or after part of the ceiling collapsed, I do not know. I can imagine the same is true for the others as well. Well, that or the inhabitants just took off with their belongings and never looked back." Sasuke said, "You know a lot about this place," with curiosity. Naruto gave a shrug. "That's just what I've heard from old man Danzo. I'm honestly surprised no one has decided to just demolish them or something. Seems like a waste to have them so close to the only food joint in this part of the town." After glancing at Sakura, Sasuke felt compelled to point out that there was another restaurant about the same size 3 blocks away, but he chose to keep quiet. A moment later, they reached their destination and were ready to open the door and enter when they noticed Naruto coughing. He said, "Tell old man that I'll see him tomorrow," and continued to walk. "I need to get home and get some sleep." After remaining remarkably quiet throughout the journey, Kakashi said, "Come on, Naruto, can't you wait until we've gotten something to eat?" Naruto waved dismissively and lazily over his shoulder. Without much thought, Sakura and Sasuke went into the restaurant, but Kakashi stayed for a while. Curiously, he observed that Naruto vanished into the alley between the restaurant and the dilapidated house he had indicated, rather than continuing down the street. When Sasuke noticed Kakashi still standing in the doorway, he called out from inside, "Kakashi, you coming?" "Oh, coming." One simple question remained in Kakashi's mind despite his attention being focused on his other students. What had he seen with his Sharingan? Finally, the finals day had arrived. For him, this day was anything but exciting, even though it was for many others. He should have been excited about only one thing, but the thought of the more important things wiped out all the excitement. The crippling anxiety had kept him up for the majority of the night, preventing him from falling asleep for more than a few hours. Even though he had been staring out of the hole in his ceiling for hours, he had not caught a glimpse of the moon in the clear night sky. He had interpreted this as a suitably ominous sign. Naruto muttered, "I look like shit," as he gazed at his image in the bathroom's broken mirror. The length of time he had been leaning on the sink's edge was unknown to him. He eventually left after deciding he had seen enough of his face for the day. For the first time in 2 weeks, he walked to the coat rack and pulled on his overcoat. His fingers were unable to remain steady long enough for him to button them up, which proved to be a major challenge. He ultimately made the decision to only use the belt to keep the coat closed and to leave it unbuttoned. His focus then shifted to his boots. They were positioned beneath where he usually hung his coat, but because it was getting colder, he decided to leave his socks on rather than tucking them inside his boots. He knelt down to pick them up and thought, why'd I never put these on the table or something? To put them on, he went to the mattress and sat down. After finishing the boots, he chose to simply lie there and stare blankly at the ceiling while placing his hands behind his head. He thought of all the nights he had spent gazing up at Cocoon and the enormous crystal pillar that supported it from the porch of the Nora house. He saw it for the first time and knew it was a beautiful sight he would never forget. He said in a low voice, "Mom, will you be there when the time comes?" Recalling that he had asked the same question 4 months prior. Perhaps he just wanted to hear it again, to feel relieved, but it felt strange to even ask that, given that she had already responded to him. What had prompted him to ask in the first place? Lightning always kept her word, as evidenced by the time she took him inside Cocoon after he inquired about it. In fact, she had vowed to sit beside him whenever he found himself gazing at Cocoon and the crystal pillar as they glowed exquisitely after sunset, and she fulfilled her promise. After some time, holding his hands to his forehead, Naruto got to his feet. A slight headache was already bothering him, but he knew it couldn't divert his attention. "I should get going," he said, looking at his pocket watch to be sure. He had to be on time for the finals, which would begin in an hour. Ignoring the dusty headband that had been sitting there for months, he went to the night table and picked up his glove. The mana drive was in his hand a moment later, and he pressed a small button just below his wrist to turn it on, then swiped his finger across the touchscreen. He entered the password, Lightning, when asked, and as text and selectable options appeared on the screen, a tiny light in the screen's corner blinked once. He had been concerned a week or two ago that the glove would end up being as forgotten and dusty as the foolish headband, but such concerns had turned out to be futile. Naruto absently produced a folded piece of paper from his left pocket. He opened it and stared at it for a while, only able to identify one word, his first name. He needed to find someone, preferably from out of town, who could read this paper to him because it was somewhat important to him. Although he would never publicly acknowledge it, he was intrigued by his team's comparison of him to the fourth Hokage, and he wasn't going to waste all those hours just because he didn't ultimately discover who his parents were. It had taken him weeks to discover it through less than legal means. He muttered, "I don't have long," and folded the paper before returning it to his pocket to keep his watch company. After shutting one pocket, Naruto opened the other to remove the picture he had received from Lightning. With tears welling up in his eyes, he gazed at it with a sorrowful smile. He had never forgotten the happiest moment of his life, which had been captured more than 2 years prior during a particularly stunning sunset. With a heavy sigh, he returned the picture to his pocket, understanding that if he looked at it for the next 10 minutes, remembering all the amazing things he had done on Grand Pulse, he would be late. But before he left, there was one last thing he wanted to do. Naruto swept his hand over the night table's surface, sending the headband and a lot of dust to the ground. He realized how old his home was when he saw all those particles floating around, with layers of dust covering every surface. It is likely that he ought to have cleaned the place years ago. He pointed his hand at the headband after choosing a specific sequence on his mana drive. He briefly closed his eyes as he reflected on the one occasion he had ever worn it, when he had headbutted Kakashi during his bullshit test. He wished he had never bothered with the fucking academy. He was sorry he had returned here. The headband caught fire and burned to ash, which was then soaked in water for safety. After making sure he had everything he needed, Naruto made his way to an old bookshelf beneath the ceiling hole. With a heavy sigh, he gave his house one final look before climbing out. "The last customer just left," Nadeshiko said. "We can close now." Danzo said, "Thank you, Nadeshiko," and nodded. "Go put the sign on the door and lock it. We have 20 minutes before the finals start, so there shouldn't be any need to hurry." Gentara had already hung his chef's clothes from a coat rack and was ready to leave when Danzo entered the kitchen as Nadeshiko made his way to the front door. Gentara smiled and said, "Are you excited to see how Naruto will do in the finals?" "Yes, of course. Though, to be honest, I'm more worried about him than anything else." "What do you mean?" "I haven't seen him in weeks now. The last time he stopped by, he asked me if I knew who his parents were. He was disappointed when I told him I did not know them, and I haven't seen him since." Why did he want to know that all of a sudden? A few seconds later, Nadeshiko came into the kitchen carrying a stack of plates. After placing them on a table, she went to get dressed. Danzo remarked, "We can ask him about it after the finals," and Gentara moved to stand by the back door, prepared to open it when Nadeshiko got back. "Let's hurry before we're late." Naruto still had time to locate a suitable person to ask for assistance because he had arrived at the stadium early. Everyone was currently waiting for a call to him from the proctor who was standing on the arena below. Naruto could tell, even from a quick look, that it was different from the previous month. People appeared to have finally realized that a sick man was not the ideal candidate for the position. Sasuke yelled, "Hey, Naruto!" while snapping his fingers in front of his face. "This isn't the time for sleeping, you know." Given that he was leaning against the wall with his chin buried in his chest and his face concealed behind the collar of his coat, Naruto could readily see why Sasuke believed he was asleep. But that didn't mean he enjoyed it, and he cocked his head slightly to give his obnoxious teammate a dagger-like glare. Sasuke stepped back in surprise and asked, "Are you alright?" Naruto said, "Never better," and then he coughed softly. "I'm serious, Naruto, are you ill? Should you be staying in bed? Seriously, you shouldn't inconvenience yourself if you are ill. Maybe we." To show that he wasn't in the mood for his concerns, Naruto pointed his left hand at Sasuke's face and asked angrily, "Do you want to find out what it feels like when your hair catches fire? Not a pleasant feeling, I tell you, not at all." Okay, I get it. Just tell me this. How long have you been sick? Have you told anyone about it?" Naruto pushed himself off the wall with a sigh. "I think it's been a year or 2 now, maybe 3. I'm not sure really, no one was. It just sort of happened one day." Sasuke looked him up and down and blinked in bewilderment. "But you haven't looked sick for once. Well, aside from that cold you caught." Naruto sighed once more and turned his back on Sasuke. "Please, drop this issue for now. Have I pestered you like that? Alright then, but you need to visit the hospital after this, if it has lasted that long. I mean it." Naruto glared at him one last time before turning to leave. In an effort to prevent hearing the same questions from other people, he pressed his hand against his mouth to cover his coughs and kept the collar as high as possible. This was one of the few occasions when he was thankful the coat was too small for him. He would much rather explain things once rather than wasting his valuable time by speaking to each person in the area individually. He looked around to see if there was anyone he could ask to read his paper. He immediately threw out the trio from Suna and all of the Konoha ninja, mainly because the red-haired boy with the gourd on his back had a deadly gleam in his eyes. When he noticed the only foreigner unaccompanied, the Auto ninja wearing the strange, heavy bracelet, he was on the verge of giving up and simply asking Sasuke. At the top of the stairs leading to the arena, he was leaning against the wall and looking down with a sense of anticipation. Naruto yelled, "Hey, you!" as he approached within 3 meters. Given that his abilities revolved around manipulating sound, he had no trouble assuming that the other boy had already heard him approaching. He said, "What do you want? Just wanted to ask something." When the younger boy realized who Naruto was speaking to, he turned to face him and raised an eyebrow. "You? What do you have to ask, then?" Naruto removed the paper from his pocket. Then he unfolded it and handed it to him, saying, "I want you to read this out for me." When the other ninja realized what the paper was, his eyebrow most likely would have raised even higher. A birth certificate. "Just read it, please." Although he was relieved that he had finally located the correct paper, Naruto was already becoming agitated because the proctor would call them down at any moment and he would never have another chance at this. "Naruto Namikaze? I thought you're Nam. Just read, will you?" Born 10th of October. Time of by. The parents, if you would." The boy let out a sigh, irritated by the abrupt demand. This was obviously not to his liking. "Father. Minato Namikaze. Mother. Kushina Uzumaki. Anything else?" "No." Just as he was about to return the certificate, he froze and looked sideways absently. Before Naruto could reclaim what was rightfully his, he muttered, "Wait a minute," and pulled his hand away. "Wasn't Minato Namikaze the 4th Hokage?" Naruto shrugged and said, "As far as I know, yeah," in response. "You are the son of the 4th Hokage?" Naruto looked around to make sure no one had heard them and replied, "Will you keep it down?" He returned the birth certificate to his pocket, folded it, and tucked it in. The Auto ninja said, "I didn't know he had a son," lowering his voice when he realized Naruto didn't want the others to know. "Neither did I, but I don't really care at this point." He frowned and abruptly trailed off, "But you're his." "What?" Scratching his chin thoughtfully, the Auto ninja examined him from head to toe. He briefly closed his eye before continuing, ignoring Naruto's disapproving look. "You're paler than before, you keep coughing, your eyes are tired and bloodshot. Your heartbeat is irregular, too. Are you ill? Perhaps you should be in bed." "Not you, too," moaned Naruto, putting his hand to his face. "Just don't tell anyone about any of this, okay? I don't need you gossiping. Relax, you can trust me on this, it's not something I would do." Finally, the new proctor shouted, "Attention, finalists. Please, come down to the arena and form a row." With a silent nod, Naruto and the others began descending the stairs, with the others following closely behind. "Welcome to the finals, and congratulations for getting this far," said the new proctor. He was chewing on one of those needles people like to throw and was wearing the typical Chunin outfit, complete with vest. "My name is Genma Shiranui, and I am the proctor for these finals. The rules of this stage are the same as in the preliminaries. You fight until the other gives up or is too injured to continue. And as before, I have the right to step in if I deem it necessary. Do you have any questions before we start the first match?" The second man on the Suna team looked around and said, Where's that handy computer?" In addition to a black hood with cat like ears that completely covered his head, he was dressed in a baggy black full bodysuit. Genma snorted and gave the boy a foolish look. "To hell with those things. I refuse to touch one, especially now when I know just how many people die from electrocution each year. Fuck computers, we're doing this old school." In the row, and perhaps in the audience as well, people looked at each other. Genma first reached into the right pocket of her pants, then the left. He began patting each pocket of his vest one by one after finding nothing in either, until he finally located what he was looking for in his back pocket. He gave them a little shout of victory and held up a heavily wrinkled piece of paper. He pointed to the words to illustrate his point. "Everyone's name is written on this paper," he said. "We go from left to right in pairs and then do it again with the winners until there's only one left. See? So much more simple than a damn computer. Any other questions?" The red-headed Suna ninja asked, sounding a little too excited, "When do we start?" Genma noticed that each of the Chunin hopefuls was prepared when she looked at them individually. His words, "We start right now," after consulting his paper, he declared, "Neji Hyuga and Naruto Farron. Everyone else, please leave the arena." Only the two fighters and the proctor remained in the arena after the Genins obeyed orders. With his back to Genma and the crowd, Naruto turned sideways while keeping one eye on his opponent and folding his hands across his chest. Standing motionless and stern, Neji gazed at Naruto with icy indifference, certain of his impending triumph. In the hopes that they wouldn't kill one another, Genma put away his paper and got ready to begin the match. Halfway between the ground and the rightmost grandstand, in the combatants' waiting area, Sasuke leaned anxiously against the railing. Danzo and his friends were eagerly awaiting the start of the match-up in the stands. "Ready?" inquired Genma. As they looked at one another, Neji nodded and Naruto shrugged. "Begin." To gain some distance, Genma retreated a few steps, but as he did so, he saw Naruto glance over his shoulder. After a brief moment of eye contact, the Genin sighed and turned back to face his opponent. Genma pondered whether he had intended to speak. With a slight cough, Naruto questioned, "So, Hyuga, huh? I've heard about you guys. Is it true all Hyugas have that gaga whatever that, gives you a huge advantage?" Byakugan, Neji informed sharply, as though reprimanding a youngster. "But yes we do. Though I don't see what use there is in knowing that. It won't do you any good." "Confident, aren't you?" Naruto smirked teasingly. "You might as well give up, Neji remarked, squinting. "There's no way you can beat me." "Well, in that case, how about not using that Byakugan of yours? If you can't beat me without it, then surely it's you who should give up." Neji scowled and shifted into the fighting position of his family. "Well, if you're so sure of yourself, then why not?" Naruto cracked his knuckles and laughed as he unbuckled his collar and faced his opponent fully. Genma observed that the boy's eyes were bloodshot and exhausted, and that he was surprisingly pale. Was he ill? If so, what kept him from going to bed? With a thin smile, Naruto said, "Then what are you waiting for? Come and get me." Immediately after, Neji charged. With the intention of instantly disabling Naruto's arm, he was aiming for his right shoulder. A single blow with his hand would suffice, even if he didn't have his Byakugan to help him. Naruto also charged, much to Genma's surprise, but he swerved at the last second, allowing Neji to get past his target due to momentum. Given that no sane person would have allowed a Hyuga to come close to them, it was an odd tactic to use when facing one. "You suck." Naruto slapped Neji across the lower back in a mocking bid. Neji turned around and threw a kunai. "Bah, you're only delaying the inevitable," he said. The blade was thrown, but Naruto deflected it with his metal weapon. Swiftly avoiding another palm strike, he struck Neji's head with the weapon's back before punching him in the face as soon as he turned his head. Naruto spun around and slammed his forearm into the other boy's throat, causing him to cough and gasp before Neji could recover. Genma stumbled backwards, startled to see someone genuinely defeating a Hyuga in close combat. Such a thing was normally punishable by death. As he smugly put his weapon away, Naruto questioned, "Sheesh, weren't you supposed to be unbeatable or something?" In response, Neji threw two shuriken at him, just missing their target. but they were enough of a distraction for him to charge in and punch Naruto in the face, choosing a forceful punch over a crippling gentle fist blow. Surprisingly, Naruto recovered in time to grab the other arm before the gentle fist blow could land and lean out of the way of a follow-up punch. When Naruto attempted to punch with his free hand, Neji grabbed his wrist. They struggled, with neither of them being able to overpower the other despite Naruto's obvious efforts to keep the deadlock going. Genma saw that Naruto's feet were beginning to move, only a few millimeters at a time, along the ground. He realized with increasing dread that if he didn't win this battle quickly, the blonde would lose. Genma was beginning to lose faith in the younger boy's prospects when he made what may have been his most cunning and shrewd move to date. He spat. Neji let out a startled cry and involuntarily stepped back to wipe the saliva from his face, unintentionally creating a gap for Naruto. Naruto punched Neji in the face once more and questioned, "What's the matter, asshole? You're not even trying, are you?" The boy spat once more, this time on the ground, and Genma worriedly observed that it was blood rather than saliva as he had assumed. "Sakura, you can open your eyes already." Sakura uncrossed her fingers and opened her eyes reluctantly. After witnessing what had happened to Hinata, she hadn't anticipated that Naruto would defeat Neji for this long, but he wasn't just winning, he was completely destroying Neji. "Never thought I'd see you so worried about Naruto," said Ino, who was seated beside her in the audience. "I mean, look at him, he's winning." Sakura responded, "I'm more worried about Neji at this point," as if she were about to break her nails. "You remember what happened to Kiba, right?" Ino turned to face her, grinning reluctantly, and snorted. "Yeah, that was pretty amazing. I've never seen ninjutsu like that before. Without hand seals no less. Or a sword like his." Thankful that Naruto hadn't chosen to use the sword or his strange methods yet, Sakura admitted, "It's the sword that worries me the most." "What do you mean? You see, it's not just a sword." "Yeah, no shit. It's a sword that can transform when it needs to be carried around." Sakura sighed, turning to confront her former rival. "That's not what I meant," she exclaimed. "Remember the girl who lost against Shikamaru?" "Oh, yeah, the one with the missing finger. What about her?" Naruto cut it off from 10 meters away. Ino turned back to watch the fight and arched an eyebrow. "What? How?" "I don't know how it works. We never asked about it, but when he's not using it as a sword, he can kill people from a distance. He's done it before." With a silent gasp, Ino's eyes widened a little. "Thankfully, he doesn't use it often. That's a good thing, isn't it?" "Indeed it is." "Goodness, why do you think he hasn't used it yet?" "Maybe he can only use it a limited number of times, maybe he just doesn't like to use it. I don't know. You can never know with him. I guess we'll have to wait and see." With her hands balled into fists in her lap, Sakura fervently hoped that the battle would not be fatal. Given that he had challenged Neji to fight without his Byakugan, which would have eliminated his ability to effectively target pressure points, it's possible that Naruto wasn't using his unusual weapon. Perhaps he wanted this to be a fight that was fair to him. In any case, Sakura disliked the mounting uneasiness as the battle continued below. Feeling humiliated, Neji stumbled backwards after taking a backhand to the face. How could this ill boy have beaten him so severely? He was the one who would prevail, according to destiny. "So, about giving up," Naruto said coolly as he sidestepped a kick that was headed his way. "Who was supposed to do that again?" "Shut up!" Neji screamed, growing increasingly irritated with the interval. He had no idea how this fight was going to turn out. "Are you even trying to hit me?" A low blow to the stomach was deflected by Neji. He used the metal plate of his headband to break the blonde's nose when he headbutted him in retaliation. Panting and glaring at one another, they parted ways. While Neji's face was already beginning to bruise along with his ego, Naruto seemed completely unconcerned about the blood seeping out of his nose. Naruto suddenly sagged a little and began to cough. When Naruto whipped his weapon out of its holster and it changed into the sword he had used to defeat Kiba, Neji saw his opportunity and charged, but he had to halt and leap back. After swiping the blade back and forth, he stabbed it into the ground and leaned on it while gasping for air. Neji remained silently enraged, wanting this to end as soon as possible but not wanting to become like Kiba. "Sorry about that," Naruto said, standing up straight and using the back of his bare hand to wipe his mouth. After giving his strange metal glove a few taps on the back, he pointed it at Neji, a red lens in its palm glowing. Before spreading to a wider circle, the glow first appeared in a circular groove around the lens. It was a completely different experience to witness glove glow up close, even though Neji had seen it during Naruto's battle with Kiba. Neji swiftly threw the last of his kunai at his opponent and charged, knowing what to expect and hoping to escape Akamaru's fate. After drawing his sword from the ground, Naruto avoided two kunai while deflecting one. His left hand clenched into a fist, which he then unclenched and swung in Neji's direction. Neji dodged and moved to the side just in time to avoid a tiny fireball that flew through the air. As the misdirected fireball struck one of the trees encircling the arena, Naruto muttered sheepishly, "Whoops," but fortunately the tree did not catch fire. The smoldering patch of bark was soaked by a ball of water as he swiftly swung his hand again. Neji, who had momentarily paused to gaze at the tree in astonishment, swiftly drew closer and would have stabbed Naruto in the shoulder if he hadn't been struck by a sudden ball of compressed air that caused him to stumble to a stop just as he was about to punch him. He barely had time to realize that Naruto's glove, which for the time being had stopped glowing, was the source of the attack before it struck him in the face, shattering his nose. As Neji was occupied with attempting to stop the bleeding and clean his face of the blood, Naruto's sword began to change once more, the blade slipping between the shifting metal plates, and he replaced it in its holster. Neji doubled over as he inhaled deeply, ducked under a left hook, and slammed his knee into his gut. But as he did, Neji realized he had the ideal moment to attack. Neji used his right index and middle fingers to poke Naruto's left shoulder, disrupting his opponent's chakra system by introducing some of his own chakra into it. To his surprise, Naruto grabbed him by the shoulders and threw him aside after punching him in the temple with the same arm. He managed to catch his balance in time to avoid a jump kick that was headed his way. "You're awfully quiet," Naruto remarked as he used his left arm as if nothing had happened and just missed Neji's chin with an uppercut. "Not going to tell me how I'm going to lose?" Neji responded by punching Naruto in the midriff, forcing air from his lungs, and then jabbing Naruto's left shoulder with his fingers once more forcefully this time. He scowled in bewilderment and annoyance as he retreated just in time to avoid a left hook. Why his gentle fist had not worked on the obnoxious blonde was beyond him. That arm should have been useless or at least out of commission given the amount of chakra he had injected to disrupt it, but Naruto appeared to be unaffected. It was impossible, in fact, and this made no sense. Neji realized he couldn't recall the last time he had fought without using his Byakugan as he punched his opponent in the chest to gain some distance. That clarified why he thought his condition was worse than it had ever been. In addition to the nearly 360-degree vision, he had become too accustomed to fighting while seeing his opponent's chakra system. He had not erred. That was the only likely explanation. Before Neji could react, Naruto blocked a backhand from the left, snapped his fingers, and a blue glow surrounded him. Naruto grabbed Neji's forearm with both hands and used it as leverage as he flipped into the air with breathless ease. Neji, with wide eyes, pulled out his left hand to attempt a right hook. When Neji drew his arm back, Naruto, who was suspended upside down, turned and struck Neji's head with his heel, causing him to stagger and his ears to ring. After landing on his feet, Naruto launched a sidekick that struck Neji in the stomach. After firmly pressing the tip of his boot against his opponent, he whirled on his toes and struck him across the face with his other boot. Just as the glow faded, he leapt off, landed on his hands, and flipped to his feet. Neji growled and wiped some blood from his split lip. He had no idea what the glow was or how it allowed Naruto to defy gravity, but at the moment, he didn't care. He was kicked in the upper thigh in return for avoiding his right straight. Then, as he attempted a left hook and a quick roundhouse kick, Naruto punched him in the gut, but Neji caught the leg and trapped it against his side. Seeing his opportunity to put a stop to this, he retreated a few steps, making Naruto hop uncomfortably in his wake. Neji grabbed Naruto's shoulder with his other hand, released his leg, and slammed his open palm into his chest exactly where his heart was before Naruto could attempt to free himself. As he pushed his opponent away from him, Neji let himself smirk triumphantly, relishing the stunned expression on his face as he stumbled backward and fell. His heart was more than stopped by the gentle fist strike he had delivered. It wasn't permanent, but it was enough to teach him a lesson. Neji said, "I told you that you could not beat me. I was fated to win no matter what," and he turned to look at the proctor. "Call the match, he isn't going to get up anytime soon." Genma sighed and nodded. He was about to raise his hand when he froze, his eyes widening and his mouth hanging open as his expression changed from calm to shocked. Neji felt something hard and metallic press against his right shoulder before he could inquire as to what was wrong. Whoa! Genma couldn't even begin to explain what he had just seen. It was supposed to be impossible for anyone to recover from a gentle fist attack that quickly, especially if it was one to the heart. Neji stumbled forward, screaming in pain, blood streaming from the hole in his shoulder, a good 5 meters ahead of him. He was struggling to stay upright when he slowly turned around to discover who had hurt him. Genma was unable to see his face, but he was fairly certain that it reflected his own. Utter shock. Naruto said, "I'm sorry, what did you say? Something about winning, perhaps?" while wearing a sarcastic smile. Strangely, seemingly seeing no further use for his weapon, He put it back in its holster without hesitation. Neji managed to ask, How are you still standing? Sincerely perplexed, Naruto cocked his head to the side. Why wouldn't I be? It's not like I broke my back falling over. Neji screamed in confusion. That was a gentle fist hit to the heart. It should have stopped your heart. Well, that explains the weird tingling I feel. Didn't know you could do that. You didn't know about gentle fist, yet you knew about the Byakugan? How did you not know? As if it weren't that important, Naruto shrugged. I only heard about the Byakugan a few weeks ago in the passing. Something about all Hyugas having it. Didn't even remember it until I heard your name. Genma questioned how anyone could be unaware of the gentle fist or the Byakugan. Everyone was aware of the Hyuga clan and their Byakugan. In fact, Kumo had attempted to abduct Hinata, the clan heiress, years prior. He questioned whether Naruto even realized how fortunate he was given this degree of ignorance. With a mocking tilt of his head, Naruto said, Well, you're not going to preach about how it was your fate to win today. With a shudder, Neji briefly removed his hand from the wound and gazed at the blood that had stained it. How? He moaned in agony as he asked. How can some no-name kid like you beat me? Fate was supposed to be on my side. I should have won. Amused, Naruto retorted, Hold on. Are you saying you should have won because of who you are? That because I'm a nobody, I should have lost to someone like you? The strong stay strong and the weak weak, and all that? Is that it? The only proof he required was Neji's refusal to meet his gaze. Yeah, about that. Sasuke questioned no one in particular. How the hell is this possible? In the waiting area, he was leaning on the railing and holding on so tightly that his knuckles were white. He was always aware that Naruto was complicated, but to withstand a blow that should have killed him? Neji had attempted to kill Hinata with the same type of blow before the Junins intervened, right? But there he was, proud and tall, while Neji was barely standing, bleeding from the huge hole in his shoulder caused by Naruto's weapon. He questioned what Naruto was doing when he reached into his left pocket. His words were equally perplexing. So, he's going to reveal it now, said Dosu, the auto ninja. Sasuke turned to him and asked, What do you mean? Before we were called to the arena, he asked me to read something for him. He still can't read. With a shrug, Dosu said, apparently. Anyways, it was his birth certificate, and he wanted to know who his parents were. With his arms folded, Shino stood beside the auto ninja and questioned, Who were they, then? Oh, you'll find out soon enough. Trust me on this one. Sasuke realized that it would have been completely useless to try to ask more questions, so he returned his attention to the battle. Why Naruto had chosen to ask a total stranger for a favor rather than his own teammate baffled him. He trusted his own friends, didn't he? What about his parents was so crucial that he needed help from outsiders? This would not be a welcome surprise. With a grimace, Naruto pulled out his birth certificate and unfolded it. He shook his head and questioned, No-name kid, you say? Neji might not be able to stay awake long enough to read it, but what could go wrong? What do you say of this then? Neji took a step to the side and tried to stay upright, managing to ask, What is that? The paper that was being shown to him was difficult for his eyes to focus on. Read it and then tell me who should have won from the start. As he read the paper, Neji remained silent, his eyes gradually enlarging. He took slow, awkward steps backwards, trying to stammer out something. T. This can't be real. Naruto wanted to respond to that with a clever remark. If he hadn't begun coughing, more violently than before, he probably would have. His skull felt like it was going to crack open, his lungs felt like they were on fire, and he became aware that he was coughing up blood. His health was deteriorating far more quickly than it had previously. There was not much time left. In the hopes that he would live long enough to witness the promise being kept, he spat the last of the blood from his mouth to the side. As he approached their side, the proctor inquired, Are you all right? He could not have failed to notice the amount of blood that had been coughed up. No, Naruto replied, using his hand to wipe away some remaining blood. But that's not important right now, right, Neji? With a trembling finger, Neji pointed at him and nearly screamed, You're the son of the fourth Hokage? The audience gasped in surprise. Naruto laughed and gave a casual shrug, apparently. Shino whispered, I can't believe this, his eyes as big as saucers behind his usual pair of sunglasses. Shikamaru, who appeared to be about to begin chewing on his fingernails, asked out loud from his side, the fourth had a son. With the exception of the redhead Gaara, who remained largely unconcerned, the Suna team was silent but unable to conceal their shock. Since he was the first to find out about this, it is understandable that the lone auto ninja showed no signs of surprise. Sasuke started to laugh slowly, a little off to the side, across from Dosu. As everyone turned to look at the boy, believing he had lost his mind due to the unexpected revelation, Shino asked, "Something wrong?" Sasuke said, "I just can't believe this," while holding one hand to his forehead and shaking his head. "Yeah, no shit," Dosu yelled, annoyed that the same thing was being said repeatedly. He could hear the audience above them, while the others might not have been able to. "No one knew your ex Hokage had a kid." "Yes, I get it. That's not what I meant, although it is true, too. You see, a month ago I had a conversation with my team. During it, Naruto remarked that people thought he resembled the fourth Hokage. We agreed with that. Hell, I even asked him if they were related." Shikamaru said, "And now we find out they really are related," and nodded. Sasuke laughed again, a little more bitterly this time, and said, "Precisely. But to think that we've known him for so long now, yet we never knew about this." Dosu said, "Don't blame yourself," as reassuringly as he could. Even he didn't know until today. A small consolation, if anything. Like everyone else in the room, Sakura whispered, "Naruto's the son of a Hokage?" Although she had noticed the similarity a month prior, she had dismissed it as a humorous coincidence. Why, after all, would the fourth son reside in an orphanage where no one knew his identity? Someone must have heard about him. Ino questioned incredulously, "How come no one found out sooner?" Her current expression of shock was nothing like the one she had when Naruto tore through Neji's shoulder with his weapon. Sakura would have perfectly imitated Ino's expression if she hadn't been so concerned about Naruto's growing coughing. Would you have believed a homeless orphan was related to one of Konoha's greatest heroes? Ino turned to face her and raised an eyebrow, asking, "He's homeless?" "Well, he lives somewhere, but otherwise yes. But how did he train out of the village if he's an orphan? Remember what Iruka said back in the academy? He said he was adopted, so I guess that's how. Explains his last name at the very least." Sakura was relieved that Ino felt no need to ask any more questions. She was worried about her teammates' welfare and didn't feel like answering any other questions right now. Since Elder Danzo was the closest thing to a friend Naruto had in the village, she briefly wondered how he was handling the news. What was his reaction to all of this? "Danzo, you're shaking." Danzo ignored Gintara's worries and asked himself, "How could I be so blind? All the clues were right in front of me for years." Nadeshiko said, "Danzo, please," in an attempt to soothe him. "No one had an idea. You're not the only one. But I knew Kushina was pregnant before their untimely death. I had thought their child had died with them, and I never once saw the resemblance between Naruto and Minato. The same spiky, blonde hair, the same blue eyes. Don't blame yourself for it. I'm such a fool." Gintara clenched his jaw, fearing that Danzo's shaking hands would break his walking cane in two. He was unable to recall the last time he had witnessed Danzo in this state. Actually, not even Naruto's disappearance years ago had caused him to react this way. "Please, you have to calm down. Think about your blood pressure. Minato's son is alive." The third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, pondered in silence. He was seated on top of the central grandstand in a cages only section. The fourth cage of Suna was seated on a second seat slightly to his left. He had a red hat and blue robe, but his face was obscured by a thick veil. It seemed that he had been involved in a regrettable and embarrassing incident involving hot tea, which Hiruzen could relate to. The cage inquired, "What do you think about the odds of this, Lord Hokage? The son of a deceased Hokage, and yet no one knew anything about him." "I am as surprised as you are, Lord Cage. Yet, now that I think about it, he takes after his father, does he not?" "Indeed he does. The resemblance is uncanny." With his arms crossed, Naruto questioned, "Well, who do you think should have won from the start?" Too weak from shock and blood loss to formulate a coherent response, Neji remained silent. His former bluster had long since vanished, literally beaten from him. Given that he was only a member of his clan's branch house and was destined to serve and defend the main house with obedience regardless of his level of skill, he reflected on how inevitable it was that he would lose to the son of the fourth Hokage. Since the start, his chances had been zero, neither. Uncertain if he was experiencing hearing issues, Neji's eyes grew wide. He waited for him to explain while glancing at Naruto, who was having another severe coughing fit. "The strong stay strong and the weak weak. That's what you believe, right?" Neji turned his head away. "Do you honestly believe I was always like this? Tell me, do you have family? Friends?" Yes. Tragically, Naruto sighed. "I didn't. For the bulk of my life, I was just a pathetic, homeless kid starving on the streets. What exactly do you think my fate should have been like? So what if my father happened to be famous? That didn't influence my life in the slightest." Neji felt compelled to tell him where he could push his sermons after hearing the speech's opening remarks. If he hadn't realized that this was probably how everyone felt when he began to ramble on about fate, he probably would have. But, if I had revealed I was related to the fourth Hokage, would you have given up? Neji remained silent. The fact that he, a branch house member, was present today instead of Hinata, a main house member, who could have easily activated the caged bird curse seal on his forehead during their fight. In fact, it would have been appropriate behavior to yield and allow Hinata to advance to the finals, made him realize what a hypocrite he was. He had always preached that fate was unavoidable and that he was destined to live a life of servitude. How come he only lost because Naruto was somehow immune to Gentle Fist if fate was really unavoidable? This was not a matter of fate. Neji thought Naruto's simultaneous coughing and laughing sounded more like nails on a chalkboard. HMPH, fate. There is only one fate. The fate which we all share. What? Naruto smiled grimly at him. He turned to go, waiting for Genma to declare his victory. We are born, we live, and we die. End of story. Everything and everyone dies in time. It doesn't matter who you are. That is our fate, ours and everyone else's. We just have to make the most of our lives before our time comes. Wait. Naruto sighed angrily and turned around again, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. Neji forced the words out of his mouth and said, I acknowledge my defeat, but allow me one question only. Shoot. Neji interpreted that as a yes. How did you survive the Gentle Fist hit? It's supposed to damage your internal organs and disrupt chakra flow. You should be crippled. You should not be able to stand. Naruto grinned feebly and said, but that's where you are wrong. You can't disrupt something that isn't there. What? Naruto began coughing once more and wheezed when he stopped. I'm sure you know about chakra and how it's practically everywhere. In nature, in our bodies, and all that. What are you getting at? What do you think would happen when you were taken away from this environment to one where chakra doesn't exist? That is not possible. Naruto said with a mocking laugh. Oh, it is very possible, before going on. He looked up at the sky and let out a loud sigh. You see, with no chakra anywhere, your own chakra system starts degrading after a while. Or it could just be something unique to me. I guess I should have guessed something like it would happen. Life is not fair, it's not fair in the slightest. I finally had the family I always wanted, only to be forced to say goodbyes. After seeing what he had seen, Neji activated his Byakugan, still without the answer he sought, and felt his legs give out instantly, unable to support him. Genma ran to his side and caught him before his injured shoulder could hit the ground. Naruto stated, so that's the Byakugan, and raised an eyebrow upon noticing that his eyes had bulging veins. Ew. Impossible. Neji muttered as he looked fearfully in front of him. Naruto could only be described as a colorless void, his chakra flow nearly stagnant and only visible with squinting, while Genma and everyone else were surrounded by a faint glow of a particular color that was specific to them, with chakra pathways transferring chakra all over their bodies like blood vessels did with blood. How Naruto was still breathing was beyond him. Genma turned to face Naruto, who gave him a blank stare in return. What's wrong? He asked. His chakra is dead. As before, the appalled audience gasped in shock at what he said. Sasuke gripped the handrail more tightly than before, whispering incredulously, this can't be possible, knowing that he was probably annoying Dosu by repeating something that had been said numerous times today. Already, this day was becoming one of the worst in his life, second only to the massacre of his clan. His always enigmatic teammate was revealed to be the fourth Hokage's son, and more concerningly, given his condition, it was unlikely that he would survive to see tomorrow. Is there any way this could get worse? He was very concerned about Neji's remark. If a person was still alive, how could their chakra be dead? Sasuke activated his Sharingan and let out a loud gasp, searching for answers to the burning question. He might have believed he was seeing a human-sized shadow if he hadn't known what he was looking at. Naruto had so little chakra in his body that it was a miracle he was still alive. Shikamaru heard Sasuke gasp and said, "What do you see, Sasuke?" Honestly speaking, I'm amazed if Naruto is anything other than a walking, talking corpse. Naruto muttered, "Yeah, that's kinda what I told you," as he looked up at the sky once more. As if to emphasize the point, he began coughing once more, and Neji noticed how his chakra flow went haywire, as if it was unsure of what to do. I'm dying even as we speak. Genma pushed Neji forward so he wouldn't have to continue relying on him and asked, "But why? Weren't you listening? This is what I get for being happy for once in my life. 4 years ago, I met Lightning and I begged and begged for her to take me with her. She didn't want to meddle with this world any more than she and the other Rift pioneers already had, but in the end she gave way and took me from this village to a place where I finally had everything I could ever hope for. A loving family, a real home, friends, a life. Seeing Naruto so furious was strange. He hadn't been this furious, much less raised his voice like he was now, even when he had physically assaulted Kiba. But then we found out how my chakra system was reacting to the new environment, and I knew my days were numbered. Or well, we never did manage to figure out if that was the case or if I was just sick to begin with. Likely both. Eventually I decided to come back here just to see old man one last time. Naruto was clenching his fists as his voice grew louder and louder until he practically screamed out the final line. I don't care about this village one bit. I never did. I don't care who my parents were or what you think about them. I don't care about this world. When Naruto paused his tirade to cough, Genma was able to pick up on the extra emphasis he placed on the two words and ask, "What do you mean, this world?" He stood up to try to calm down the angry boy and gave Neji a pat on the back, indicating that he would no longer be there to be leant on. Neji was relieved to see two medics at the door, prepared to rush to him as soon as the battle was declared over, or earlier if necessary. He inhaled deeply and gave Genma a menacing glare. I don't belong here anymore. Grand Pulse is the world I call home nowadays, and when Lightning comes back for her promise, I can return there, and nothing will stop me. Neji muttered, another world, attempting to come to terms with such a ridiculous idea. Even though it was implausible, he realized that it was the only logical explanation for Naruto's skills and weapon. Seeing that there was no use for his Byakugan anymore, he deactivated it and moaned in agony as he pressed his left hand against the wound on his shoulder. If nothing else, the bleeding had slowed. Still attempting to calm the blonde, Genma said, but what about your friends here? What about them? Don't you want to say goodbye to them or something? You might still have time for that? There's only one person in this world that I care about, and I'm sure old man understands why I'm doing what I'm doing. Besides, he's better off without me around to be worried about. Everyone else can go to hell for all I care. Naruto's coughing was the only sound to break the long, tense silence. Finally, I've spoken enough, he said. Are you going to call the match anytime soon? With a sidelong glance at Neji, Genma nodded and held up his hand. Before he could say anything, Naruto pulled out his weapon, changed it into a sword, and aimed the blade at Genma's throat. He narrowed his eyes and said, you had better not use my father's name, with a menacing tone. If Genma was taken aback by his response, it was not evident. Winner. Naruto Farron. Neji let out a sigh and sagged to the floor, struggling to keep his eyes open. Before he knew it, the medics had arrived and were getting ready to take him away. All he wanted to do now was sleep after being completely humiliated by a half-dead boy. His faith in fate was eroding, and he never imagined that he would lose in this way. None of this was supposed to be possible, and none of it made sense. All of this could have been a bad dream. This nightmare had no other explanation, so it had to be. Long before the medical staff had completed hoisting Neji onto a stretcher, he had passed out. Trying not to cough, Naruto walked to the closest wall and holstered his gunblade. His breathing was getting more difficult than ever, and his vision was already beginning to blur. Telling them anything was a waste of his valuable time. Reaching the interdimensional rift now appeared to be unattainable. He ran up the wall and turned on the grav.con unit. When he got to the top, he knelt down and peered down at the arena. He considered using a simple pull of the trigger to end Neji's suffering, but he no longer trusted his aim and saw no justification for taking the poor bastard's life. He should be allowed to live. Otherwise, his lesson would have been in vain. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a dim flash of light. Anywhere he saw that flash, he would know it was the interdimensional rift opening. Upon turning around, he discovered that the flash had come from within the village. However, how? The rift was outside the village's boundaries, in the woods. Naruto wasn't whining about whatever was going on. He already knew where he was supposed to go. To get a final glimpse of the arena and its patrons, he turned his head around. His eyes accidentally locked with Danzo's, and he gave him a feeble smile. Then he leapt. Gintara said, Danzo, where are you going? Danzo said simply, after him, and got up from his chair. If I can only talk to him one last time. But, ignoring any attempt to stop him, Danzo hurried away. Before anyone realized what was going on, he was gone. Sakura asked Ino, where is he going? To say goodbye, replied Kakashi, who was standing on the bench behind theirs and thrust his head between them. He lifted his headband and fixed his Sharingan on the spot where Naruto had been just a moment before. I expect nothing less from him. Where did you come from? Ino inquired, taken aback by his unexpected arrival. I've been sitting here ever since you arrived, but we should concentrate on something more pressing for now. Why do you say that? Kakashi remarked, because of him, gesturing to an Anbu in the grandstand adjacent to theirs. He was clearly looking around surreptitiously, as though he was waiting for something, even at this distance. He looks very suspicious, and I have no idea who he is. And I know every Anbu in the village. I doubt he has our best interests in mind. Expect the unexpected, my dears." Uncertain if the young person would survive the ordeal, Genma watched as the medical staff removed Neji. Both the wound and the volume of blood he had lost were very concerning. What sort of weapon could casually tear a hole through someone's shoulder? Genma realized that Naruto had dropped his birth certificate to the ground during one of his coughing fits when he vanished behind the wall, encircled by his peculiar glow. He took it up and looked it over. Although there was a slight blood stain, it was still easily readable. He read aloud, "Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki," to himself. How could anyone have failed to identify Naruto's parent? How could he have missed it? Genma pondered how Naruto's life might have turned out if someone had recognized him. If he had someone to look after him in Konoha, perhaps he wouldn't have been so irate and uncaring about other people. Since he had found happiness in another world, the only certainty he had was that he would not pass away in this manner, coughing up his guts in agony. Genma folded the paper and shoved it into a vest pocket with a heavy, sorrowful sigh. After the finals, he would present it to the Hokage. He found it difficult to accept that any of this was not a dream. Anbu leaned closer to the Hokage and whispered, "Lord Hokage, should we follow him?" "No," Hiruzen replied with a headshake. "He is doing what his heart tells him to, and there's nothing we can do to stop him. Let him go home to his new family." "Understood, Lord Hokage." Hiruzen let out a sigh and briefly closed his eyes. He prayed that his words would somehow find their way to Minato in the afterlife. "Minato, your son is truly something," he thought. "Regardless of the outcome, you must be proud of him." The Kazekage remarked, "Such a curious youth he is," and Hiruzen silently concurred. "But we have something to finish, do we not, my dear old teacher?" Instantly, Hiruzen's eyes popped open. He turned his head and whispered, "No." The Kazekage pulled the veil away from his face, revealing a smile that was not his own. Orochimaru. People fell asleep as white feathers suddenly started to fall throughout the stadium. Only skilled ninjas were able to quickly identify the situation and break the genjutsu, but they had to defend themselves when Oto and Suna ninjas attacked after revealing themselves to the crowd. Orochimaru and Hiruzen Sarutobi leapt to the roof to engage in combat as a burst of smoke filled the cage booth. Along with a swarm of enemy ninjas, a giant snake slithered into the village with the intention of causing chaos and destruction, causing a portion of the wall surrounding it to collapse. It was the start of the Konoha Crush. Nevertheless, there was one person who was unaware of it and didn't give a damn. Naruto stumbled around the final bend, leaning against the wall with one hand. The second he pushed himself away from the wall, he fell over because he was too exhausted from all the running to stay upright without assistance. Breathing and moving were extremely difficult, but he knew he had to continue because he was so close to his destination that he couldn't give up now. He forced himself to stand. His steps were unsteady and slow, and he continued to stare at the interdimensional rift. He didn't need his eyes to tell him where he was, just outside the alley where he and Lightning had first met him, but his vision had become so blurry that he could only tell where the rift was by the bright glow it emitted. To pass away in the location where his life had really started felt appropriate. Naruto pondered old man's emotional state. Was he truly getting it? Did he feel happy or sad for him? Knowing that he had supported the boy through the years, would he be happy when he returned home tonight? With shaking hands, Naruto extracted Danzo's pocket watch from his left pocket while grinning piteously. Even though he couldn't see the watch's face or the time, the comfort of its weight on his hand allowed him to overlook such unimportant details. If only he had had the time, he would have returned it with all his heart. The pocket watch dropped out of his hand as he began coughing again, this time with the same ferocity. When the coughing stopped, he tried to find it, but there was nothing on the ground that even vaguely looked like the watch. When he saw a figure emerge gracefully from the rift, he gave up looking for it. Naruto ignored the fact that the figure appeared to be wearing armor. With the last of his strength, he ran forward, his eyes wide with delight. "Lightning!" he exclaimed, leaping into the arms of his adoptive mother. Lightning yelled, "Naruto!" As Naruto collided with her, she encircled him with her arms, and he reciprocated by pressing his head against her left shoulder. A silver and gold suit of armor, thigh-high armor boots, and a long sash of white feathers over her left leg had replaced the turtleneck shirt and miniskirt. Even if Naruto had the time and his vision hadn't been rapidly failing, she doubted he would have inquired about her new outfit because she had always been an angel in his eyes. Whispering, "I knew you'd come," Naruto said. He stopped suppressing his tears and cried softly against her shoulder. "I did promise," Lightning returned in a whisper, grinning piteously. In an attempt to console Naruto, she gave him a back pat. Seeing him cry hurt her every time, especially after they learned that he was slowly dying. Naruto muttered, "It's not fair," following a prolonged period of silence. "Life is so unfair. I finally had the life I always wanted." "I know." Naruto's breathing grew increasingly difficult as he coughed up more blood. He heard the pain of every breath. His words, "I don't want to die," were interspersed with tears. "I understand," said Lightning in a cool whisper, "but you must let go." "I'm scared." "Don't be. I'm here by your side." Though it was more likely that he was coughing again, Lightning believed she felt Naruto nod against her. The poor boy sounded as though he was choking on his own blood. "I love you, Mom." Lightning replied, "I love you, too," and gave him a closer hug, "My son." Naruto opened his tired eyes and grinned as broadly as his condition permitted. Tears of sadness suddenly became tears of happiness. He sagged against her shoulder and stopped breathing after letting out a final sob. Lightning picked up Naruto's lifeless body without saying a word, a single tear streaming down her cheek. He appeared to be taking a nap because he was so calm. He was also grinning broadly, but the illusion was harmed by his concerning broken nausea. He had just been in a fight. Did this imply that, as he had stated, he would attempt to become a ninja upon his return to his village? What was a ninja? Although he hadn't sounded completely certain, Naruto had referred to them as the guardian core of his world. The interdimensional rift behind her dimmed a little, a sign that it was about to close, permanently this time. It was time to get out of this world. Glancing down the street, she noticed Danzo running, panting, around the corner. When he realized what he was seeing, he instantly froze. After a brief moment of eye contact, Lightning turned and vanished through the rift. It closed behind her with a loud and powerful thunderclap, leaving Danzo standing by himself in the deserted street. He stared at the location where the rift had been for an unknown amount of time. He couldn't believe he'd been too late to say goodbye, and his mind had gone blank. He hadn't been by his side, and Naruto had always been like the grandson he never had. He had failed him. He noticed something on the ground off to the side. He realized it was the pocket watch he had given Naruto when he picked it up. It was on the ground, but why? Despite its age, it was still functioning flawlessly, so there was no reason for him to discard it. He gradually realized that perhaps, just possibly, Naruto had left it for him to discover. Perhaps instead of taking it to his grave, he had wished for Danzo to have it back. In any event, Danzo held the watch against his chest and let unrestrained tears fall down his cheeks. He closed his eye and turned to gaze at the clear sky above. "Goodbye, Naruto. Rest in peace, my boy." The flamberge was driven into the ground by lightning, which also ensured that it remained upright. Near New Bottom, she was kneeling beside the grave she had excavated for Naruto. It was a peaceful spot with a lovely view of the surroundings of the town, something she knew Naruto would have valued. Despite the fact that wildlife rarely, if ever, visited this location, she had chosen to use the flamberge as a grave marker and had jammed the switch to ensure it remained in sword mode in case it was touched. She was certain that Naruto would have accepted her choice, but she questioned whether he would have preferred to be buried with the gunblade instead. Lightning sighed deeply as he examined the photo Naruto had carried in his pocket. It featured the two of them grinning at the camera as they stood at the end of the pier during a stunning sunset. Naruto was seen in the photo putting his head against her shoulder and giving her a tight hug. Remembering how excited and joyful Naruto had been that day, she grinned. When Sarah showed him the picture, he even referred to it as the best day of his life. Lightning grinned sadly as she locked the picture after hooking a thin chain through a hole she had made in the top right corner. She then secured the flamberge's grip with the chain, making sure it wouldn't slide to the ground. She had left the pendant in the Nora house before leaving, and the chain was from her necklace. It felt strange to speak aloud when she was fully aware that the dead couldn't possibly hear her, but she had a hunch that her words would still reach him. "I'll have to get going now, Naruto," she said as she stood up, "but don't worry about a thing." After some time, she said, "I'll come visit you when I get the chance." She gave the grave another melancholy smile as she used the back of her hand to wipe a single tear from her cheek. "I promise you that. Rest in peace, my son." Lightning picked up the prototype mana drive she had given to Naruto, turned around, and left without saying anything more. As she turned around, she was unaware that a transparent figure had materialized on the grave, watching her leave with a broad smile on his lips. Naruto muttered, "I'm finally home again," before he vanished in a sudden wind that blew over his grave.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.